Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, settle into where you are, and let the shoulders soften a little. There is no hurry tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you. Tonight we walk the long roads with the pilgrims of the Middle Ages, and we look into the small worn bag each of them carried, the little leather pouch that hung against the hip on a cord of plaited hemp, soft with sweat and rain and years, and we lift out, one by one, the 12 plants a traveler trusted to carry him alive from his own front door to the far holy place, and, if God and the herbs were kind, all the long way home again. The shop is very still this evening. The shutters are closed against the dark, and the fire is banked low and red in the hearth, and there is no sound at all but the small dry tick of the candle, and, now and then, the settling of an ember. On the long counter, in the warm round circle of the single flame, there lies one small thing. And it is not a book tonight, and it is not a jar, it is a bag. A traveller's bag, of soft brown leather gone almost black at the folds, with a flap that buttons over with a little bone toggle, and a strap worn thin in one place, where it crossed a shoulder a great many miles. It is empty now, or nearly so. But once it was full, and once it walked the whole length of Christendom and beyond, and tonight, very slowly, we are going to open it and look inside. I want you to picture, before we begin, the world that this bag belonged to. Picture the roads of Europe 700 years ago and more, the long dusty tracks and the deep muddy lanes, and the old stone ways the Romans laid down and never quite let crumble, the paths that ran from village to village and shrine to shrine across the whole of the known world. And picture walking those roads in 2s and 3s and great straggling companies, the pilgrims. They were not soldiers and they were not merchants, though they often walked beside both. They were ordinary people who had set out from home, on foot for the most part, to travel to a holy place. Some went to be healed of a sickness. Some went to be forgiven of a sin. Some went because a loved one had died, and the grief was too large to sit still inside the house with, and the only thing to be done was to walk. And some went, if we are honest, simply because the wide world was out there, and a person only lives the once, and a pilgrimage was the only reason a poor soul of that age would ever be given to see beyond the next hill. There were 3 great roads above all the others, 3 journeys that drew pilgrims from every corner of Europe, and the bag on our counter knew all 3. The first ran south to the city of Rome, the long road the travellers called the Frankish Way, the road that came down out of England, through the cathedral town of Canterbury, and crossed the narrow grey sea, and went on through the whole of France, and climbed at last into the high cold mountains of the Alps. There, near the very top of the world, where the air grows thin, and the snow lies even in summer in the shadowed places, it crossed by a fearsome high pass, and on that pass, in a wind that could kill a man between one breath and the next, there stood a stone hospice founded by good monks to take in the freezing and the lost, with great patient dogs to find the fallen in the drifts, and a fire always burning, and a bowl of something hot for any soul who staggered in out of the white. And then the road came down the long sunlit valleys into Italy, and wound at last to the holy city of Rome. The second great road ran west, all the way to the far edge of Spain, to a green and rainy corner of the world, where, it was said, the bones of one of the first followers of Christ lay in a stone tomb. That road they called the Way of St. James, and pilgrims walked it in such numbers for so many hundreds of years that the road itself wore a groove into the land, and a chain of little towns and hostels and bridges and hospices grew up all along it to feed and shelter and mend the walkers. It crossed high mountains too, the cold passes of the border country, and then ran on west for many weeks through the dry uplands of northern Spain, under a wide and burning sky, by fields of grain and stretches of bare stone, toward the rumour of the sea. And the third road was not made of dust and stone at all, or not for most of its length, for the third road led to the holiest place of all, to the city of Jerusalem in the far east, and to reach it a pilgrim had first to cross the whole of the Mediterranean Sea. So the third road ran down through Europe to the great trading city of Venice, that city built upon the water, where ship captains made their living carrying the faithful across the deep. And there the pilgrim would strike a bargain, written down before the officials of the city, if he was wise, for a place aboard a galley, and then he would commit his soul and his sick body to many weeks upon the heaving water, all the way to a dusty port on the far shore, and from there on foot again, up through the hot hills to the holy city. 3 roads, north and west and east, and every one of them was hard. I want you to understand, gently, before we open the bag, just how hard. Because the plants inside it will mean nothing to you, unless you feel a little of what they were for. These journeys were not the walks of a single afternoon. The road to Rome from England took the better part of 3 months, walking from dawn to dusk, day after day after day. The road to Santiago from the heart of France took a month and more. The road to Jerusalem and home again could take the best part of a year, and many who set out never came back at all, and everyone who set out knew that, and made their will and said their goodbyes as though they might be final, before they ever stepped through the door. And on those roads the body suffered. This is the first thing to hold. The body suffered in 100 small ways and a few large ones every single day. The feet blistered and split and bled. The legs cramped and the joints swelled. The traveller turned an ankle on a loose stone in a mountain pass, far from any help. He drank from a stream that looked clean and was not, and the flux took him. That terrible loosening of the bowels that could empty a strong man into a weak one in a few days, and into a corpse in a week. He ate bad bread or tainted meat at a poor inn, and lay awake all night with a churning belly. He caught a chill crossing a river in the rain, and the fever rose in him, and there was no doctor, and there was no bed but a heap of straw in a strange barn, and there was no one who loved him within 500 miles. He fell among robbers who were thick on the lonely stretches, and was cut, and had to bind the wound himself with whatever he had. He could not sleep, lying among strangers in a crowded hostel, with the snoring and the coughing and the small thieving hands in the dark, and his own heart racing with the fear of all of it. And underneath everything, always, like a shadow walking just behind him, there was the great fear of the age, the fear of the pestilence, the plague that could sweep through a town and leave it silent, and that a pilgrim might walk straight into, without ever knowing it was there. And I would have you picture, too, before we open the bag, the people themselves who carried it, for they were not heroes out of a story, but ordinary souls of every kind, and the bag belonged to all of them. There was the young man, strong and frightened, sent by his village or his lord to walk a vow none of them could afford to break. There was the grey old woman, walking perhaps her last great journey, going to the shrine to lay down a lifetime's sorrows before she died. There was the merchant who had grown rich and uneasy and went to buy back his soul with his feet. There was the sick one, the lame one, the one with the wasting illness, walking, often to be healed, dragging a failing body across half the world on the hope of a miracle at the far end. There was the grieving one, the mother who had buried a child, the widow, the orphan, walking because grief is too large to sit still inside a house, and the only thing to be done is to walk. There was the penitent, sent to walk off a great sin, sometimes in chains, sometimes barefoot, as a punishment and a cleansing. And there were the simple curious, the ones who went, if we are honest, half for God and half because the wide world was out there, and a poor soul of that age would never otherwise be given any reason at all to see beyond the next hill. They walked together, all of them, in great straggling companies along the famous roads, sharing the fires and the hostels, and the dangers and the herbs, the rich and the poor, and the sick and the strong, all reduced by the road to the same dusty, trudging equality, all carrying, in one form or another, the same small bag of plants against the same long list of miseries. And they walked, most of them, on foot, which is the thing hardest for us now to truly feel, for we have forgotten in our own age what it is to cross a whole continent at the pace of a walking body, to feel every single mile of it pass under your own 2 feet, to be 3 months on the road, and have moved only as far as a body can carry itself. The pilgrim felt the size of the world in his legs and his lungs and the soles of his feet. He felt the slow change of the country around him, the speech shifting, the food shifting, the very shape of the hills and the color of the earth shifting, day by slow day, as he walked himself out of his own familiar corner of the world and across into the strange. And he felt, above all, his own body as the one tool. He had the one thing that would either carry him to the shrine and home again, or fail him somewhere in the middle and leave him stranded. And so he tended that body, that one precious tool, with a care we can scarcely imagine. And the herbs in the little bag were the whole of his means of tending it, his only medicine across thousands of miles and many months. The difference, every single day, between a body that could go on and a body that could not. That is the world the little bag was made for. Against all of that, and what was in it to set against all of that, was not magic, and it was not the medicine of our own day, with its clean white tablets and its careful measured doses. What was in it was plants, 12 plants, more or less, that a wise traveler or a wise mother packing for a traveling son, or a kind monk at a hospice door knew could do something, even a little something against the road. Some of them grew in the garden at home and were dried and packed before setting out. Some of them grew wild along the very road, so that a knowing eye could stoop and gather them as he walked. Some came from far away and cost dearly and were hoarded like treasure. And every one of them carried, folded inside it, the long memory of all the people who had used it before, the wisdom handed down from grandmother to grandchild, from monk to monk, from the old herb, books copied out by candlelight in the monasteries, all the way back to the physicians of Greece and Rome, who had written the first of it down 1,000 years, and more before our pilgrim ever laced his boots. So that is what we will do tonight. We will open the bag, and we will lift out the 12 plants one at a time, and for each one we will sit a while. We will look at the plant itself and learn what it was. We will learn why it mattered so much on the road, against which of the road's many cruelties it was carried. We will learn how a traveler with almost nothing, no kitchen, no fine apparatus, only a small iron pot perhaps and a wooden cup, and his own 2 hands and his own teeth, could prepare it and use it. We will follow it along the roads it traveled, north and west and east. And for each one, at the end, we will close our eyes for a moment and stand beside a single pilgrim in a single small moment of need and watch the plant do its quiet work. You do not need to remember any of it. I will say that now, and I will mean it the way I always do. There will be no quiz at the end of the night, and no one is keeping count of what you hold and what you let slip. The names of the plants are not here to be learned. They are here only to be soft green sounds in the warm dark, like the rustle of a hedgerow as you pass it half asleep. Let them drift by you. Let your eyes close whenever they wish to close. If you are gone into sleep before we reach the second plant, then the bag has done its truest work, and I will go on lifting out the rest of it quietly into the dark, for the sake of the few who are still walking with me, and for the simple peace of saying the old names aloud in the lamplight, the way the herbs were always meant to be named. Let the breath grow slow and even. Let the weight of the day settle out of you and down into the bed or the chair beneath you. And let us undo the little bone toggle and lift the worn flap and reach inside. The first thing my fingers find, and it is the first thing for a good reason, is a small flat bundle of dried leaves, broad and ribbed and a little leathery, tied with a twist of grass. They are the leaves of a plant so humble, so common, so utterly beneath notice, that you have certainly walked over it 1,000 times in your own life, and never once given it a thought. It grows in every trodden place. It grows in the cracks of paving, and the edges of paths, and the bare hard ground of doorways and gateways, anywhere the foot of man or beast has pressed the earth down flat and killed off the prouder, softer plants that cannot bear to be stepped on. It has a low rosette of broad leaves, each one ribbed with strong parallel veins that run from the stem to the tip, and from the middle of the rosette rises a slender stalk topped with a narrow green spike of tiny flowers, going to a brown spike of tiny seeds. The old people of England called it waybread, the bread of the way, the road, and they called it the herb of the wayside. And far away across the sea, the native peoples of the New World, when at last it travelled there, called it the footstep of the white man, because it sprang up wherever the newcomers walked, as though it followed them. It is the plant we call plantain, and it is the truest traveller in all this bag, for it is the plant of the road itself. Think of why the pilgrim reached for it first, before all the others. Think of the feet. Of everything the road did to the body, it began with the feet, every single morning and every single mile. The pilgrim of that age did not walk in the soft cradled shoes of our own time. He walked in shoes of hard-turned leather, thin, soled, often little more than a leather sock with a sole sewn on, soaked through in every river crossing, and never quite dry again, stiffening as they dried into shapes that did not match his foot. He walked 20 miles in a day, and 20 more the next, and 20 more the day after that, week upon week upon week, across stone and grit and root and mud, with a heavy pack upon his back, pressing his whole weight down through the soles of his feet onto the unforgiving ground. And so the feet blistered, the skin rubbed and reddened and rose into a bubble of fluid and burst and tore away, and left the raw flesh open to the dirt of the road, and that raw place, if it was not cared for, could fester and swell and redden and streak. And a festering foot in a world without any other medicine was not a small thing, was not the small thing it is to us, for it could lame a man. And a lamed pilgrim was a pilgrim stranded, far from home, a beggar in the road, and many a journey ended not at a shrine, but at a wayside grave with nothing wrong, but a foot that had been let go too long. And this is where the humble waybread came into its own, for it was, above all the plants in the bag, the friend of the wounded foot. The wise traveller had 2 ways to use it, and the beauty of it was that he carried the dried leaves, for when he could find no fresh, but along most of the roads he never needed the dried at all, for the living plant grew right there, beneath his blistered feet, in the very dust of the path, as though the road itself had set out the cure beside the wound. So at the end of a hard day, when the pilgrim eased off his sodden shoes and saw the damage, he had only to look down at the edge of the path, and there it was, the low-ribbed rosette pressed flat to the trodden earth. And he would pick a few of the broadest leaves, and he would do the simplest thing in all of medicine. He would put them in his mouth and chew them. He would chew the leaves to a soft green pulp, mashing them between his teeth until they ran with their own faint juice, and then he would take that wad of chewed leaf, warm and wet, and press it gently onto the burst blister, onto the raw torn place, and bind it there with a strip of cloth torn from the hem of a shirt. The old herb writers called this a poultice, and they did not always know why it worked, but they knew, across 1,000 years of watching, that it did. It cooled the burning of the raw skin. It seemed to draw the heat and the anger out of the wound. It calmed the redness, and it kept the festering away. And by the morning the foot that had been screaming was merely sore, and the pilgrim could lace up his shoe and walk on. We know a little now of why the old people were right to trust it, though they could not have said it in our words. The broad leaves of the waybread hold within them substances that soothe inflamed flesh, and that gently draw a wound together and discourage the rot. And the same juice that cools a blistered heel was used, all across the old world, to calm the sting of a nettle and the burn of an insect and the itch of a rash, so that a child stung in a meadow would be told to find the waybread and rub it on, and the hurt would ease. But the pilgrim did not need to know any of that. He needed only to know what every walker before him had known, all the way back to the dim beginnings of the road, that when the foot is broken open by the long miles, you find the leaf that grows in the path, and you chew it, and you bind it on, and you trust it, and in the morning you go on. It was a plant the soldiers knew too, for the same reasons, for an army marches on its feet exactly as a pilgrim walks on his, and the old battle leeches who tended the wounded after a fight kept the waybread close at hand to lay on cuts and gashes. And so the plant carries a double memory in it, the memory of the long road and the memory of the long war, the two great walking miseries of the old world, and against both of them it pressed its cool, broad, green leaf. And it grew, as I have said. Everywhere men went, springing up in the disturbed and trodden ground that men leave behind them, so that wherever the roads of the pilgrims ran, the cure for the roads ran with them, the green following the feet, the medicine springing up in the very wound the road had made. There is something in that I have always found quietly beautiful, lying awake in the dark thinking of it, that the most stepped upon plant in all the world, the one we crush without a thought 100 times a day, was the one the old travellers trusted most to mend the feet that did the crushing. And I would have you feel, before we go to the pilgrim himself, just how long and how unrelenting the road of the feet truly was. For that is the thing that makes the humble leaf so precious. The traveller did not walk for a day or a week, but for season upon season, and the feet bore all of it, in every weather the year could send. In the spring, when the great pilgrimages set out, when the roads dried enough to walk, and the days lengthened enough to make the miles, the way was deep with the mud of the thaw, and the feet were wet from dawn to dusk, and wet skin tears and blisters far more easily than dry, so that the spring traveller's feet were a misery of soft torn flesh, and the waybread was wanted every single evening. In the high heat of summer, the dust of the dry roads worked into the wet raw places and ground them like sand in a wound, and the feet swelled in the heat, and the shoes that had fit in the cool morning grew too tight by the burning afternoon, and again the broad cool leaf was reached for, laid against the swollen straining flesh. In the autumn, when the great companies came home down the shortening days, the cold rains came back, and the mud with them, and the cycle began again. The feet, you see, never had a season of rest. They bore the whole year of the road, and the waybread bore them. And the road itself, remember, was every kind of ground a body can walk on, and each kind hurt the foot in its own way. There were the old straight stone roads the Romans had laid down and never quite let crumble, hard as iron underfoot, jarring the foot and the knee and the hip with every step, mile after stony mile. There were the deep soft lanes between the hedgerows, where the mud could pull a shoe clean off and suck the strength out of every stride. There were the high mountain tracks of loose sliding scree that turned the ankle and bruised the sole. There were the river fords where the cold water rose to the knee, and the smooth stones rolled treacherous beneath the feet. There were the long monotonous stretches across the bare dry uplands, where there was nothing to look at and nothing to break the rhythm, and the mind went somewhere far away, while the feet wore down toward the bone. And along every kind of that ground, in every season, the broad-ribbed leaf of the waybread grew, in the cracks of the old stone road, in the trodden mouth of the muddy lane, in the bare ground at the river ford, in the dust of the dry upland track, springing up wherever the foot had pressed the earth flat, so that the traveller was never, on any ground, in any season, more than a few steps from the cure for what the ground had done to him. There was a kind of mercy in that arrangement of things, an old quiet mercy woven into the very edges of the road, that I have always found a comfort to dwell on in the dark, the thought that the most trodden upon plant in all the world had set itself out patiently along every mile a tired soul would ever have to walk, waiting to be of use. Let us close our eyes now, just for a breath, and stand beside one of them. It is the end of a long day in early summer, somewhere in the flat green middle of France, on the road that runs south toward the mountains and Rome beyond them. The light is going golden and low. A man sits down at last on a flat stone by the edge of the track, in the long shadow of a hedge, and with a small groan he works his right shoe off his swollen foot and peels back the sodden wool of his footcloth, and there on the back of his heel is the wound he has felt growing all afternoon, a torn and weeping blister gone red and angry at the edges. He does not curse it, for he is too tired to curse, and besides, he has walked this road before, and his father walked it before him, and he knows exactly what to do. He looks down, and there, between his feet, growing up out of the very dust of the road that hurt him, is the low broad rosette of the waybread, just as he knew it would be, just as it always is. He leans down and pinches off 3 of the fattest leaves, and he wipes the worst of the dust from them on his sleeve, and he puts them in his mouth, and he chews slowly, looking out at the gold light over the fields while he does it. And there is a faint green bitterness on his tongue that he has tasted 100 times, and that means, to him, the end of the day, the easing of the hurt, the small kindness of the road to the body it has spent all day wearing down. And when the leaves are a soft warm pulp, he takes them out and lays them tenderly against the raw place on his heel, and binds them there with a strip of rag, and lets the cool of it sink in, and breathes out, long and slow, into the gold evening. And whatever else has gone wrong that day, and much has, the foot, at least, the foot that must carry him all the way to Rome, will be a little better in the morning. That is the first plant, the leaf that walks beside every traveler. Let it rest now against your own tired feet in the warm dark, and let us reach into the bag again. The feet, though, are only the first of the road's small cruelties, and the next thing my fingers find in the bag is for a hurt that lies a little higher up the leg and a little deeper in. It is a stouter bundle than the first, heavier, and it does not smell of leaves so much as of earth, for it is not leaves at all, but a few thick dried roots, dark and gnarled and a little shrunken, cut into short lengths and strung together on a thread. They are the roots of a tall, handsome plant that grows in the damp places, by the ditches and the stream sides, and the wet edges of meadows, a plant with great rough hairy leaves and drooping clusters of little bell-shaped flowers, pink or purple or a soft creamy white, that the bees love in the early summer. The old people of England gave this plant a name that tells you at once what it was for, the most useful name in all of herb lore, for they called it knitbone. They also called it boneset, and they also called it healing herb, and the learned writers, taking the old word for it down from the Greeks, called it comfrey. But knitbone is the name to hold tonight, for it tells you the whole of the story. Knitbone, the plant that knits the broken body back together. Think now of the second great injury of the road, the one that came not from the slow grinding of the miles, but from a single sudden moment of bad luck. The turned ankle, the wrenched knee, the hard fall on a wet stone. The pilgrim walked, remember, over ground that was never made smooth for him, over loose scree on the mountain tracks, and slick mud on the river paths, and rounded cobbles worn treacherous by 10,000 feet before his. And he walked it tired, and he walked it laden, and he walked it in poor light at the end of the day, when the body is clumsy, and the foot comes down a little wrong, And so, again and again, the ankle rolled, and the great pain shot up the leg, and the joint began at once to swell and to darken into a bruise, and the foot that had carried him so far would now barely bear his weight at all. And there was nothing in that age to be done for such a thing the way we would do it. There was no cool pack of ice, for ice in summer was a thing only kings could dream of. There was no tight wrapping of clever cloth, no pill to swallow against the swelling. There was the road and the swelling joint, and many miles still to go before the next shelter, and the knowledge, cold in the belly, that a man who could not walk on the road to Rome was a man in very great trouble indeed. This was the dread of the high places above all, of the great cold passes in the mountains. And so I think of the Nitbone most of all up there, on the fearsome pass through the Alps where the Frankish road climbs to the roof of the world. Picture it. The path grows steeper and stonier with every hour. The green falls away below, and then the trees fall away, and then there is only grey rock and grey sky, and, even in the height of summer, white snow lying in the shadowed hollows, and a wind that comes off the ice with teeth in it. Up there, where a turned ankle meant lying down in the killing cold, with no help for half a day or more, the wise traveller trod with all the care he had, and carried, against the worst, the dark gnarled roots of the Nitbone in his bag. And up there, near the very top, where I told you the good monks kept their stone hospice with the fire always burning, and the great patient dogs that went out into the drifts to find the fallen, a pilgrim who had wrenched his leg on the long ascent and dragged himself, white-faced, the last cold miles to that door, would be taken in and laid by the fire, and the monks, who knew their herbs as all the religious houses did, would reach for the Nitbone too. The way they used it was this. They took the dried root, or the fresh if the season gave it, and they grated it or pounded it to a coarse wet mash, mixing it with a little water, or sometimes with hot water to make it the more pliant, until it was a thick grey paste. And this paste they spread thickly over the swollen joint, over the darkening bruise, all around the wrenched ankle, and over it they bound a cloth, and over that, in the cold, they might bind a wad of wool. And here is the strange and lovely thing about the Nitbone, the thing that earned it its name across 1,000 years of patient watching. As the paste of the root dried against the skin, it grew stiff, it hardened. It set around the joint into a firm, rough casing, and held the hurt limbs still, the way a splint holds it still, so that the swelling could not run riot, and the torn parts within could be kept from grinding against each other, and could begin, in their stillness, to mend. The old people did not have our word for what they had made. But what they had made, with a grated root and a strip of cloth, was very near a cast, a stiff supporting shell about a broken or wrenched joint, and they had made it from a plant that grew for free in every wet ditch in Christendom, and they had been making it and trusting it since long before anyone thought to write it down. And there was more to it than the stiffening alone, for the root of the Nitbone is rich and slippery, with a soothing substance that seems, in some quiet way, we are only now beginning to understand, to hurry the healing of the deep tissues, to speed the joining of bruised and broken parts, so that the name was not idle and not mere hope. Bones did seem to knit faster under the grey paste. Bruises did seem to fade sooner. The old leeches laid it not only on sprains and breaks, but on deep stubborn wounds and ulcers that would not close, and on the great swellings and the painful joints of the old. And everywhere it seemed to do its quiet good work of drawing the torn flesh back toward wholeness. We must be a little careful here, and I will be gentle with the claim, for it is a powerful plant and not one to be eaten freely, and the old people, who used it mostly on the outside of the body, on the skin and over the hurt, were wiser in that than they knew, but laid upon a wrenched ankle at the top of a cold mountain, with the fire warming one side of you, and the grey paste hardening around the joint, and the long road still to come. The knit bone was a friend beyond price, and many a pilgrim who would otherwise have been left behind in the snow walked down the far side of the mountains on a leg the knit bone had held together. And I would have you dwell a little longer on that high cold place, the great pass through the Alps, for it was the most fearful single stretch of the whole road to Rome, and the season in which a pilgrim crossed it decided whether he lived or died as surely as any herb in his bag. The wise traveller timed his whole long journey from England or from France so as to reach the high pass in the short window of the high summer, in the few weeks when the worst of the snow had melted from the path, and the storms came a little less often, for in the spring the pass was still choked and deadly with snow, and in the autumn the storms came back early and without warning, and in the winter it was simply death to attempt it at all. And the good monks at the stone hospice near the top spent the cold months digging out the bodies of the foolish and the unlucky who had tried the crossing too late or too early and been caught by the white. So the pilgrim came up to the pass, if he was wise, in July or in August, and even then, even in the very height of summer, the cold up there could kill. And the path was loose and broken and treacherous with the rubble the winter had torn loose, the very worst kind of ground for the ankle and the knee, and a wrenched joint in that high thin cold air, far from the hospice, with the light failing and the temperature falling, was very near a sentence of death. And the body, up there, was not the strong body that had set out from home, but a body already worn thin by many weeks of road, already short of sleep and short of good food, already weakened, and a weakened body turns an ankle more easily and mends it more slowly, so that the high pass caught the traveller at his very weakest and asked of him his very hardest climb. That is why the knit bone mattered so on that road above all others, and why the good monks at the high hospice kept their store of it, for they took in, season after season, the broken and the wrenched, and the frozen who staggered up to their door, and they had learned, across the long generations of that holy work, exactly which root to grate, and which paste to spread, and which limb to hold still by the fire, while the storm howled outside, and the great patient dogs slept by the hearth, their work for the day done. There is a whole long quiet history of mercy bound up in that one root, and that one high stone house. The monks and the dogs and the fire and the grey paste and the broken travellers mended and sent on down into the sunlit valleys of Italy, season after season, century after century. And the knit bone was at the heart of it, the humble ditch, root, that held the broken pilgrims together at the roof of the world. Let us stand a moment beside one of them. It is high on the great pass, and the light is failing, and the cold is coming down. A woman, grey at the temples, far from the warm valley where she was born, has come down too hard on a loose stone an hour back, and her right ankle is a hot, tight ball of pain inside her shoe, and she has hobbled the last weary mile, leaning on her tall pilgrim staff, biting her lip, watching the dark come on, and praying the hospice was as close as the last traveller told her. And there at last is the light of it, a small warm square of yellow in all that grey, and the smell of wood smoke on the cold wind, and a monk at the door who takes her arm without a word and brings her in to the fire. He eases off her shoe and looks at the swollen joint going purple now in the firelight, and he nods, the slow nod of a man who has seen 100 such ankles come down off that mountain. And he goes to a shelf and takes down a dark, gnarled root and grates it into a bowl and stirs in a little hot water, and when it is a thick, grey paste, he kneels and spreads it, cool and strange, all around her throbbing ankle, and binds it with a clean cloth, and tells her, in his rough mountain tongue that she only half understands, to keep it still and to sleep. And in the night the paste hardens around the joint and holds it, and the deep slippery goodness of the root sinks into the bruise, and by the third day, resting in the warm hospice while the storms blow over outside, she can bear a little weight on it again, and by the week she is going down the long sunlit road into Italy, on a leg the knit bone knit. That is the second plant, the bone knitter of the cold high pass. Let it rest now, and let us reach in again. The next thing my hand finds is a soft feathery bundle, quite different from the heavy roots, light as a breath, made of the dried tops of a plant with leaves so finely cut and divided that they look like the soft plumes of a small green feather, and topped, when it grows, with flat clusters of small flowers, white or the faintest dusty pink, standing up stiff and dry along the verges of every old road and the edges of every old field. This is a plant that grows wild absolutely everywhere across the whole of Europe, so common that few thought to plant it, and almost everyone knew it, and it has gathered to itself, across the long centuries, more names and more legends than almost any other herb in the bag. The old people called it staunchweed, and they called it woundwort, and they called it nosebleed, and they called it the soldier's herb, and the carpenter's herb, and the knight's herb, and the learned writers gave it a name from the oldest story of all, for they called it after the great warrior of the Greeks who was said to have carried it to heal the wounds of his men upon the field of battle. It is the plant we call yarrow, and of all the plants in the bag, this is the one for blood. For here is the next of the road's cruelties, and it was a sharper and more sudden one than blistered feet or wrenched ankles, and the pilgrim feared it as he feared little else. It was the cut and the gash and the spilling of blood, the lonely stretches of the great roads, the deep woods and the empty moors, and the high lonely passes far from any town, were the haunt of robbers, of desperate men who waited where the travellers must pass, and fell upon them for the few coins in their bag or the good shoes on their feet, and a pilgrim who resisted, or who simply was unlucky, might be cut with a knife, slashed across the arm, flung up toward the blow, or worse. And even where there were no robbers, the road itself cut him, for he climbed through brambles and thorn, and worked with the small sharp tools of his own survival, the knife he ate with, and cut wood with, and he fell on sharp stones, and a deep cut that bled and would not stop was a thing that could empty the life out of a strong man by the side of a road where no one would find him for a day. To stop the bleeding of a wound, quickly, with what you had, was perhaps the most urgent small art of the whole road, and yarrow was the herb that knew how. The way of it was simple, and it could be done in a moment, which was the whole point, for a bleeding wound does not wait for you to light a fire and boil a pot. The traveller took the dried feathery leaves, or in summer he could snatch the fresh leaves growing right there along the verge, and he crushed them between his fingers, or chewed them quickly to a pulp, and he pressed that pulp hard against the cut, packing it into the wound, and held it there, and bound it tight with a strip of cloth. And the bleeding slowed and clotted and stopped. This was no idle hope and no mere charm, though charms were said over it too. The yarrow truly does hold within its finely cut leaves a power to hasten the clotting of blood, and to draw the edges of a wound together. And the old soldiers and the old travellers had learned this the hard way, on 1,000 fields and 1,000 roadsides, long before any physician could have told them the reason. And so the plant was packed into wounds across the whole of the ancient and the medieval world, and was trusted utterly, and the very name Woundwort, the herb of wounds, carried that trust in it like blood in a vein. And the yarrow did more than staunch. The same crushed leaf, bound over the cut, helped to keep the wound clean, and to hold off the festering that the pilgrim feared even more than the first bleeding. For a wound that stopped bleeding but then went bad, that swelled and reddened and ran with foul matter, was as deadly in that age as the deepest cut. The bitter aromatic strength of the yarrow worked against that rot, and so a wound packed with yarrow and bound up was a wound twice protected. Its bleeding stopped, and its corruption held at bay, and many a pilgrim who took a robber's knife in the arm on a lonely stretch of the road owed his life to the soft grey feather of the soldier's herb crushed into the gash. The plant was thought, too, to be lucky, to be a protector, and the travellers and the soldiers carried it half as medicine and half as charm. And who is to say, when the whole world was as dangerous as theirs, that the comfort of holding a lucky thing was not its own kind of medicine, steadying the racing heart, slowing the panicked breath, letting the cold hands work. And it is worth dwelling, before we go to the pilgrim, on just how lonely and how exposed the great roads could be. For the soldier's herb was above all the herb of the unprotected traveller far from any help. We think, perhaps, of the pilgrim roads as busy ways, thronged with companies of the faithful, and in places and seasons they were, but between the towns and the hostels there were long stretches where a traveller walked alone for hours, across empty moor and through deep silent wood and over bare burning upland, with no soul in sight and no help within a day's walk. And it was there, on those lonely stretches, that the danger gathered. The robbers knew the roads better than the pilgrims did, and they chose their places with care. The narrow defile where the path was forced between rocks, the deep wood where a man could be dragged off the track unseen, the lonely upland where a cry would carry to no one, and there they waited, and fell upon the travellers who came through alone, or in small unguarded parties. And the road of St. James, out across the wide empty uplands of northern Spain, had long stretches of exactly that lonely kind, miles of straight empty path, under an enormous sky, beautiful and terrible at once, where a pilgrim could walk a whole afternoon and meet no one, and where, if the worst came, there was no one at all to help him. And the season made its own difference here too. For the robbers were thickest, when the pilgrims were thickest, and the days were long enough to walk far. In the high summer of the great pilgrimages, and a traveller crossing those lonely uplands in the burning heat was already weakened by the sun and the dust and the thirst when the bad moment came, his strength low, his guard perhaps down, his water perhaps gone. The body that had to survive a robber's knife on a lonely upland in high summer was a body already half spent by the road itself, and a wound that bled freely from such a body, in such heat, far from any shelter or water or help, could empty the life out of it with terrible speed. That is why the staunchweed was packed by every careful mother into every departing son's bag, and gathered fresh by every knowing eye along the very verges of those lonely roads. For the soldier's herb was the one thing a traveller could carry that might stand between a sudden wound on an empty road and a slow death in the dust, the one quick mercy that needed no fire and no pot and no time, only a crushing of the grey feathery leaf and a hard pressing of it into the wound, and a steadying of the shaking hands and a holding on. So picture, one last time before we close this part of the bag, a young pilgrim alone on a high lonely road, the road of St. James, out on the bare dry uplands of northern Spain, where the sky is enormous and the path runs straight and empty for miles between fields of pale grain, and the only sound is the wind and the crunch of his own feet. Two men have come out from behind a ruined wall, men with hard eyes and no good in them, and there has been a bad moment, a shove and a flash of a blade, and now they are gone with the few coins he had, and he is sitting in the dust at the side of the road with a long shallow cut across the back of his forearm welling red, his heart slamming, his hands shaking. But he is not without help, even here, even alone, for his mother packed his little bag with her own hands before he left the village. And among the herbs she folded into it, soft and grey and feathery, are the dried tops of the staunchweed, and his shaking fingers find them, and he crushes them, and he presses the green pulp hard into the cut, and holds it, breathing, looking out at the wide pale land, and slowly, the welling slows, and the blood darkens and thickens at the edges of the wound and stops, and he binds the herb in place with a strip torn from his shirt, and after a long while his heart stops its slamming, and he gets up, and he goes on west toward the Saint, on the road that very nearly took him, with the soldier's herb bound over the place where his life had begun to run out into the dust. That is the third plant, the soldier's herb on the lonely road. Let it rest, and let us reach again into the bag. Now the road tested the belly even harder than it tested the feet, and the next plants my fingers find are for that deeper, more dangerous trouble, the troubles of the gut, which killed more pilgrims by far than all the robbers and all the wrenched ankles put together. So let us go a little slower here and a little gentler, for these are the plants that stood between the traveller and the worst of all the road's quiet deaths. The first of them does not announce itself by smell or by softness, but by its bitterness, for even dried and folded into a twist of cloth, it carries a sharp, clean, bitter scent that catches at the back of the nose, the unmistakable smell of a plant that means business. It is a bundle of silvery grey, green leaves and small, dried flowering tops. The leaves finely divided and covered all over with a fine soft down that gives the whole plant the look of being dusted with silver, so that in life it stands in the dry waste places and the old field edges like a little ghost of a bush, pale against the green. This is one of the most famous bitter herbs in all the long history of medicine, known and feared and trusted for thousands of years, and its name has come down to us heavy with old meaning, for it is called wormwood, the wood, the plant, against the worm, and it was the great guardian of the medieval gut. To understand why a pilgrim would carry so harsh and bitter a thing, you must understand what the road did to a person from the inside. The traveler could not choose his food, and he could not choose his water, and both of them, day after day, were trying quietly to kill him. He drank from rivers that men and beasts upstream had filed, from wells gone bad, from green standing pools when nothing better could be found, and into his body, with every swallow, went the unseen sicknesses of bad water, the gripes and the gnawings, and above all, the flux. That terrible loosening and bloodying of the bowels that the old people called the bloody flux, which could waste a strong pilgrim down to a trembling shadow in a few days, and into a grave in a few more, and which followed the great roads like a curse, breaking out in the crowded hostels, where many sick and weary bodies were packed together, passing from one to the next in the shared bowls and the shared cups and the shared filth of the road. And the food was as bad as the water, the bread sometimes mouldy or made from spoiled grain, the meat sometimes turned, the whole diet of the road poor and strange and hard upon a stomach far from home, so that the traveler was forever bloated or gripped or churning or worse. And then there were the worms, the true worms, the parasites that lived in the bad food and the bad water, and took up residence in the bowels of half the people of that age, sapping their strength from within. And these too the bitter plant was carried to drive out. Against all of this the pilgrim reached for the wormwood, and the way he used it tells you much about the medicine of that age, for the old people understood, in their own language, a truth that we have only lately come back round to, that a bitter taste upon the tongue wakes up the whole tired machinery of the stomach and sets it working again. The traveler took a small pinch of the dried silver leaf, never much, for it was a powerful thing, and too much of it did harm, and he steeped it in hot water if he had a fire and a pot, or in cold water through a long day if he did not, and he drank the bitter brew slowly, and felt it stir his sluggish belly back to life, felt the gripe ease and the appetite return, and the fullness within seemed to settle. The old writers said it fanned the fire of the stomach, and that is a lovely way to put it, for that is just how it felt. A small clean fire lit in a cold and soaring belly, burning off the heaviness, driving out the corruption, settling the churning down. And against the true worms it was given stronger and more deliberately, a bitter dose taken to make the gut an unwelcome place for the small invaders and drive them out. And for this, it was trusted across the whole of the old world. And indeed the very name we still use was given to it for exactly that. And there is a thing to be said here about bitterness itself, for it is the heart of how this plant worked, and of much of the old medicine besides. The old people had no word for what we now know lives inside the wormwood, no way to name the substances that gave it its power, but they had something nearly as useful, which was a long and patient understanding of taste, and they had learned, across the generations, that a deep, clean bitterness on the tongue does something to the body, wakes it up, stirs the sluggish stomach back to life, sharpens the dull appetite, sets the cold digestion working again. They spoke of it as the fanning of the fire of the stomach, and that homely image held a real truth, for a bitter taste truly does rouse the tired machinery of the belly, and a traveller whose digestion had gone cold and heavy and sour on the poor strange food of the road could be brought back to himself by a small bitter cup, the appetite returning, the heaviness lifting, the gut working again as it should. And so the bitterness that made the wormwood so hard to swallow was not a flaw to be endured, but the very thing that did the good. The harshness and the healing bound up together in the one silver leaf, and the traveller learned to welcome that clean, deep bitterness on his tongue, to read it as the taste of his belly being mended, the way you might learn to welcome the sting of a cold stream on a hot, tired foot. And the wormwood teaches, too, a thing about the whole craft of the old medicine and about the wisdom of using a strong thing wisely. For it was, of all the herbs in the bag, among the most powerful and the most easily misused, a plant that did great good in a small dose and real harm in a large one. And the old people knew this, and used it sparingly, a small pinch and no more, against the real need and not the small one. There is a discipline in that, the discipline of respecting a strong medicine, of taking only what is needed and no more, of holding the powerful thing in reserve against the true crisis. And the wise traveller had it, guarding his bitter silver leaf as carefully as his coins and his courage, knowing that the very strength that made it save him could also, taken carelessly, do him harm. It is a wisdom worth keeping even now, the old respect for a powerful remedy, the knowledge that more is not always better, and that the strongest things must be used with the most care. And the wormwood, the bitter guardian, was perhaps the plant in all the bag that taught it best. It was a hard medicine, and I would not have you think it was a pleasant one, for the bitterness of wormwood is a thing you do not forget, a bitterness so deep and so lasting that it became a byword in the old tongues for everything sorrowful and harsh in life, so that to call a thing wormwood was to call it the most bitter of griefs. But the pilgrim did not carry it for pleasure. He carried it because it worked, because a body that had taken some small foulness from the water could be steadied by it before the foulness took hold, because a belly griped by bad food could be settled by it, because the slow draining death of the flux might, with the bitter cup taken early, be turned aside. And he carried it too, because it could be added in tiny amounts to water that he doubted, to wine going to vinegar, to make the doubtful drink a little safer and a little more bearable. And a traveller who must drink what he can find learns to value anything that makes the doubtful drinkable. So the wormwood went into the bag, wrapped tight against its own strength, the silver ghost, leaf, the bitter guardian, and a wise pilgrim guarded it as carefully as his coins, and used it sparingly, and blessed it often. And I would have you understand, before we go to the pilgrim in his need, just how the road conspired to fill the belly with fullness. For the bitter herb makes sense only against the full weight of that danger. The trouble began with the water, and the water was a trouble that never let up. The traveller could carry only a little water with him, a skin or a gourd that was soon empty, and so all day, every day, he had to drink whatever the road provided, and what the road provided was rarely clean. He drank from the rivers that the towns upstream poured their filth into. He drank from the wells of poor villages, where the beasts and the people and the waste all drained toward the same low ground. He drank in the dry uplands, from green standing pools and slow muddy streams, because there was nothing else between him and the next town, and the thirst was a torment under the burning sun. And into him, with every swallow, went the unseen agents of the gut sicknesses, the gripes and the gnawings, and above all, the flux. And the hostels, which were the traveller's shelter, were also, cruelly, among the places the sickness spread the worst, for they gathered together under one low roof, on one floor of shared straw, many weary sick bodies from many far places, all eating from shared bowls and drinking from shared cups, and lying in the shared filth. And a single traveller carrying the flux into such a place could pass it to a dozen others before the night was out, so that the very shelter the road offered was, in the matter of the belly, often its own kind of danger. And the season made it worse, for the great pilgrimages set out in the warm months, and the warmth that made the roads walkable also made the food spoil faster, and the water go fouler, and the sicknesses of the gut breed and spread the more readily, so that the high summer that filled the roads with pilgrims also filled them with the flux. Against all of this the wise traveller carried his bitter silver leaf, and used it early, at the very first griping, before the foulness could take a deep hold, and added a little of it to water. He doubted and wine going to vinegar, and steeped it in the evenings when the belly felt uncertain, and guarded it as carefully as his coins, for it was, of all the plants in the bag, perhaps the one that stood against the road's most patient and most common killer, the slow draining death that came not from a robber's knife or a mountain fall, but from a single bad swallow of water on an ordinary afternoon. Stand a moment with one who needs it. It is a poor hostel on the road to Rome, on a wet grey evening, and the long low room is crowded with travellers laid out on the straw, and a man among them is in a bad way, has been since noon, his belly griping and loosening, his face gone the colour of tallow, the first cold fear of the flux upon him, for he has seen it take others, and he knows the look of its beginning. He is far from home, and there is no doctor within 100 miles, and the only physician in this room is the little bag at his side. With shaking hands he opens it, and finds the tight twist of silver leaf, and he breaks off a small pinch, no more, and the kind old woman tending the hostel fire sets him a little water to heat in a battered pot, and he steeps the bitter leaf in it, and when it is dark and bitter he drinks it down, grimacing at the harshness of it, and lies back on the straw. And through the long night the small clean fire of it works in his cold and frightened belly, settling the churning, steadying the gripe, and whether it was the herb alone, or the herb and the resting, or the herb and the mercy of God, by the grey dawn the worst of it has passed. The loosening has slowed, the deadly cold fear has lifted, and he is weak but he is alive, and in a day or two he will go on south, having met the great killer of the road and turned it aside, this once, with a pinch of the bitter silver leaf. That is the fourth plant, the bitter cup against the flux. Let it rest, and let us reach in again, for the next one against the belly is humbler still. And you will know it well, and perhaps you carry it in your own kitchen this very night. It is a small papery bulb, white and dry, that rattles a little among the leaves and roots, and you would know it anywhere by its smell, that sharp, warm, pungent smell that no other plant in the world possesses, the smell that has hung in the kitchens of the poor in every land and every age. It is the garlic, of course, the little white bulb that breaks into its cloves, each clove wrapped in its own fine papery skin. And of all the 12 plants in the bag, it is the one the modern world has never stopped using, never forgotten, never let slip, for it sits on your own shelf tonight, as it sat in the Pilgrims' bag 700 years ago, doing, more or less, the very same quiet work. The old people called it many things, but they prized it above almost all the kitchen herbs for its strength, and they hung it in their houses and wore it about their necks, and pressed it into the hands of anyone setting out on a dangerous road, and the pilgrim, more than anyone, knew its worth. For the garlic was the road's quiet defender against the very same enemies as the wormwood, the foulness of the water and the food and the air. But where the wormwood was harsh and dangerous, and to be used with care, the garlic was a daily friend, a thing a man could eat freely, could chew raw at the side of the road, could swallow with his bread, and it would work its protection in him without harm. The travellers ate it against the bad water above all, for they had learned, again across long centuries of watching, that a man who ate his garlic seemed to suffer less from the gripes and the loosening and the gut sicknesses of the road than a man who did not, and we know now that there was good reason in this. For the garlic holds within its sharp, white flesh a true power against the small, unseen agents of sickness, a power to kill or to hinder them, so that the strong, pungent clove eaten before or after the doubtful meal was, in a real and not merely a hopeful way, a guard upon the gut. And so the pilgrim ate it, raw and strong, peeling a clove with his thumbnail and chewing it down with a grimace and a swallow of poor wine to chase the burn, and trusted it to keep the foulness of the road from taking root inside him. And the garlic guarded more than the belly, for it stood, in the mind of that age, against the very greatest fear of all, the fear of the pestilence, the plague that could empty a town in a fortnight. When the plague was abroad, and in those centuries it was abroad terribly often, the people reached for the garlic and the other strong, smelling things, and ate them, and hung them about themselves, and breathed their pungent reek, in the belief that the strong smell could drive off the bad air that they thought carried the sickness. Now we must be gentle here, and honest, for the bad air was not the true cause of the plague, and the garlic could not truly have held the great pestilence off, and many who trusted in it died all the same. And that is one of the sorrows of the old medicine, that it did not always know its own enemy. But I will not be too quick to mock the frightened soul who hung the garlic at his neck and walked on through the plague year roads, for fear itself is a sickness, and the racing heart and the clenched gut of pure terror can lay a man low almost as surely as the plague, and the strong familiar smell of the garlic, the smell of home, of the mother's kitchen, of every safe meal he had ever eaten, may well have steadied that terror, slowed that heart, let the frightened traveller walk on, instead of sitting down in the road to despair, and against the true smaller enemies, the foul water and the spoiling food, and the festering of a wound, for the crushed clove was laid on cuts as well as eaten. The garlic truly did its good work, and earned its place in the bag 100 times over. And let me dwell a moment longer on the small white bulb, for it was, of all the 12, the most everyday and the most beloved. The one the pilgrim never had to think about hoarding, because it was cheap and common, and grew in every garden, and was sold in every market along the way, so that he could always replenish his store. He carried it strung in a little plate, the way the country people have strung it for thousands of years, and he ate it freely. A clove with his bread at the midday halt, a clove chewed down at the side of the road, when the water he had drunk sat uneasy in him, and he did not measure it or guard it or fear it, for it did no harm and asked nothing, and gave its quiet protection to anyone who would simply eat it. And because it was so common and so safe, it was the herb the poorest pilgrim could rely on most, the herb of the traveller with no money for the dear far-travelled spices, the defender of the humble. And there is something fitting in that the most beloved and most lasting of all the road's medicines should also have been the cheapest and the most freely given. And in the worst of times, in the plague years that came again and again down those centuries, the small white bulb became something more than a daily comfort, became almost a talisman, a thing clutched and worn and breathed against the great terror, and the roads in those years were strange and frightening places to walk, the towns half empty, the doors marked, the bells tolling. The very air, the people believed, thick with the poison of the sickness. And the traveller who had to walk through such a world, who could not simply shut himself in his house and wait as the townfolk did, but had to keep moving, town to town, through whatever the road led him into, leaned hard on the strong familiar reek of the garlic, ate it, crushed it, held it to his face, breathed it, and whether it truly turned the bad air or not, and we know now it could not have turned the true sickness. It gave him the smell of home and of safety to breathe in the most frightening places on earth, and steadied his hammering heart, and let him keep his feet moving forward when everything in him wanted to sit down in the road and give up to the fear. And that steadying, as I have said, and will say again, was itself a real medicine, perhaps the truest the garlic gave in those years, and not to be despised. So I see the pilgrim, with his garlic on the worst of the roads, in the worst of the years, in a town where the plague has been, where the doors are marked and the streets are too quiet and the church bell tolls and tolls. He is afraid, deeply afraid, the cold animal fear of a man walking through the shadow of death, and there is nothing in his bag that can truly save him from what lies in that air if it is there. But there is the garlic, and he peels a clove and crushes it in his fingers so the sharp reek rises strong, and he eats it, and he holds the bruised remnant to his face, and breathes that pungent smell, the smell of every kitchen he has ever loved, and somehow the smell of it, the strength of it, the sheer alive pungency of it, puts a little heart back into him, and steadies his shaking, and lets him keep walking, through the quiet town and out the far gate, and on down the road into the clean open country beyond, alive and breathing and going on. That is the fifth plant, the small white bulb that kept the fear away. Let it rest now in the warm dark, and let us reach again into the bag. Now not every pilgrim road was made of dust and stone, and the next plant in the bag belongs to the strangest road of all, the road that was made of water. So let us leave the walkers for a while, the blistered feet, and the wrenched ankles, and the bitter cups taken in the wayside hostels, and let us go down to the sea, to the great city built upon the water, where the longest pilgrimage of all began in earnest. And let us take up the plant that the traveller to the Holy Land needed most of all upon the heaving deep. The next thing my fingers find is a hard, light, knobbly thing, dry and pale brown, shaped a little like a small clutching hand, and when I scrape it with a thumbnail there, rises at once a warm, sweet, fiery scent, clean and bright and unmistakable, the scent of far-off lands and warm seas, of the spice markets and the long trade roads of the East. It is a root, or rather it is the underground stem of a plant that does not grow in the cold north at all, but far away in the hot, wet countries of the East, and it had to be carried, dried, over enormous distances, along the spice roads and the sea roads, before it ever reached the hand of a European traveller. And because of that long carrying it was costly, dear, a thing of value, and it is said that in those days a pound of it might cost as much as a whole sheep. It is the ginger, the warm fiery root from the Far East, and of all the plants in the bag it had travelled the farthest before the pilgrim ever packed it. And it was the great friend of the body that was cold, and the great friend, above all, of the body that was at sea. For consider the pilgrim who set out for Jerusalem, the holiest journey, and the hardest of the three. He came down through Europe to the great trading city upon the water, Venice, that city whose whole fortune was built on carrying the faithful across the sea, and there, with a captain in the presence of the city's officials, he struck his bargain for a place aboard a galley bound for the far shore, and then he gave himself over to the sea for many weeks. And the sea did to him what the sea does to all who are not born to it. He was sick. He was wretchedly, helplessly, endlessly sick, heaving over the rail with the long roll of the swell, his stomach turned inside out, unable to eat, unable to keep down what little he forced himself to swallow, weak and green and miserable, packed below decks in the foul air among hundreds of others, in the same wretched state, in the heat and the stench and the ceaseless sickening motion, for week after week of open water. The seasickness was no small thing on so long a voyage, for a man who cannot eat for weeks grows weak, and a weak man is the first to fall to the fevers and fluxes that swept the crowded ships. And so the sickness of the sea, which seems to us a small and almost comic misery, was on those long voyages a real danger to the life, sapping the strength the pilgrim would need to survive the rest. And against it, more than any other thing, the traveller trusted the warm, fiery root from the east. The way of it was the simplest in the world, for the ginger needed no fire and no pot, and no preparation at all in the worst of the sickness. The wretched pilgrim, hanging green over the rail, had only to break off a small piece of the dried root, or to take a thin sliver cut from it, and put it in his mouth, and chew it slowly, and let the warm, clean fire of it spread over his tongue, and down into his churning belly, and the old people knew, and we know still, that there is something in that warm root that truly settles the heaving stomach, that calms the sickness of motion, that soothes the urge to vomit, and lets the belly grow quiet again. It is one of the oldest and truest remedies in all the world for a stomach turned by motion and the seasick pilgrim. chewing his costly sliver of root at the rail of the galley, with the grey sea rolling endlessly beneath him, was reaching for the same comfort that travellers reach for to this very day. Though he did not know it, and could not have dreamed how long after him it would still be used. And the ginger did more than settle the sea sick belly, for it was, above all, the great warmer of the body, and that mattered on more roads than the sea road alone. The old physicians divided all things into the hot and the cold, the wet and the dry, and they reckoned the ginger to be hot, deeply and reliably hot, a root that kindled warmth in a cold body and drove out the chill, and so it was carried not only against the sea, but against the cold itself, against the killing cold of the high mountain passes, against the chill that crept into the bones after a river crossing in the rain, against the cold weakness of a body worn down and shivering far from any fire. The traveller who came down off the great Alpine pass blue and shaking, the pilgrim who had forded an icy mountain stream and could not get warm, the weary soul whose own inner fire seemed to be guttering low, would chew the warm root or steep it in hot water to make a warming drink and feel the heat of it spread out from the belly into the cold limbs, a true and welcome warmth. The inner fire kindled again, and it warmed the digestion too, settling the heavy cold stomach after a poor meal, easing the bloating and the gripe, so that the warm root was a comfort against the troubles of the gut, as much as against the troubles of the sea and the cold, a small fire carried in the bag against all the many coldnesses of the road. And I would have you feel the cost of it, for the cost is part of the wonder. This warm root did not grow in any garden the pilgrim knew. It grew far away, in the hot, wet countries of the East, beyond the edge of the world the traveller could imagine, and to reach his hand it had to be dug and dried and carried across enormous distances, over the long overland spice roads, through deserts and mountains and the lands of strangers, or across many seas in the holds of trading ships, passed from merchant to merchant, each taking his profit, each adding to the price, so that by the time it reached a market in Europe it was a luxury, a treasure, a thing so dear that, as the old reckoning had it, a single pound of it might cost as much as a whole living sheep, and so a poor pilgrim might carry only the smallest knob of it, a single precious piece pressed into his hand at parting by someone who loved him and had saved for it, and he hoarded it as he hoarded nothing else, and used it only against the worst, the deep cold of the high pass, the very depths of the seasickness, the times when nothing else would do. There is something moving in the thought of that small, costly root, dug from the warm earth of a country the pilgrim could not even picture, carried halfway across the turning world by hands he would never see, all so that, on some grey heaving sea or some frozen mountain pass, a frightened traveller could chew a sliver of it and be warmed and steadied and saved. The whole vast web of the old world's trade, the spice roads and the sea lanes and the markets, came down, in the end, to that one small mercy in one small bag, the warm root that had travelled farther than any pilgrim ever would, to be of use to him at the very end of the earth. It was the dearest thing in the bag, as I have said, this far travelled route, and a pilgrim of small means might have only a little of it, a single precious knob hoarded against the worst, and he used it sparingly, and valued it greatly, and there was something fitting in that the longest journey, The journey across the sea to the holiest place of all should be eased by the plant that had itself made the longest journey to reach him, carried hand to hand and ship to ship across half the turning world, before it ever came to rest in a poor traveller's bag. And I would have you feel the whole of that strange water road before we go to the pilgrim at the rail, for it was unlike any other journey in the world. The traveller bound for the Holy Land came down through Europe, over the same hard roads and high passes as the others, until he reached the great city built upon the water, and there his journey changed its nature entirely. He had to wait, often for weeks, for a ship and a season, for the captains sailed only in the safe months, and would not put out into the winter storms. So the pilgrim lodged in the crowded city, spending what little he had, waiting for the wind and the captain and the company to be ready. And then came the bargaining, the careful striking of a contract with a ship's captain, written down, if the pilgrim was wise, before the officials of the city, setting out what he would pay and what he would be given, the place to sleep, the food, the water, the stops along the way, for the captains were sharp men, and a foolish pilgrim could be cheated of everything before he ever left the harbour. And then, at last, he went aboard and committed himself to the deep. And the deep was a hard master. The galley was crowded far beyond what we would think bearable. The pilgrims packed below decks in a long, low, foul space, each with barely room to lie down, in the heat and the dark and the stench of so many bodies and so little air. And there they stayed, week upon week, as the ship worked its slow way down the sea, stopping at islands and ports for water and trade, then out again across the open water. And the season, even the safe season, brought its storms and its calms, the storms that flung the ship about and turned every stomach inside out and filled the dark hold with the misery of the seasick, the calms that left the ship sitting motionless under a burning sun while the water ran low and the food spoiled and the tempers frayed. The body that had been worn by the land road was now worn by the sea road, by the endless motion and the bad air and the poor food and the seasickness that, on a voyage of so many weeks, could truly drain a traveller to the edge of his strength. And against the worst of it, against the heaving that would not stop, the pilgrim reached for the warm, fiery root from the east. The costly little knob hoarded against exactly this, and chewed it, and was steadied, and lived to see the far, dusty shore at last. So let us stand, just for a moment, on the deck of one of those galleys, far out on the open sea, somewhere between Venice and the distant, dusty port that is the gateway to the Holy Land. It is the third week of the voyage, and the swell is long and slow and endless, and a pilgrim is hanging over the rail, as he has hung for days, green and trembling and emptied out, unable to keep down so much as a mouthful of bread, weak as a child, beginning to be truly afraid for himself. For he has watched two others below decks slip from the seasickness into the fevers and not come back up the ladder, and he reaches, with a shaking hand, into the little bag at his side, and finds the precious knob of the warm root, the costly thing his sister pressed on him at the door with tears in her eyes, and he breaks off a small sliver of it, and puts it in his mouth, and chews, and the warm, clean fire of it spreads over his tongue, and down his throat, and into the churning misery of his belly, and slowly, slowly, the hiving eases, the awful urge subsides. The belly grows a little quiet, and for the first time in days, he thinks he might be able to keep down a little water and a little bread and live. And he stands at the rail, chewing the warm root, looking out at the endless grey rolling water toward the far invisible shore and the holy city beyond it, with a little strength coming back into him, warmed from within against the cold deep sea. That is the sixth plant, the warm root and the heaving sea. Let it rest, and let us turn back to land, and to the heat that comes not from the cold without, but from the fire within. For there is a sickness deeper and more frightening than the troubles of the belly, and that is the fever, the burning heat that rises up inside the body itself. And the next plant my fingers find is for that. It is a bundle of dried bark, curls and strips of grey, brown bark peeled from the twigs and branches of a tree, and it is bitter, bitter as the wormwood almost, with a clean, astringent bitterness when you touch your tongue to it, and it comes from one of the most familiar of all the trees, a tree that leans over every slow river, and every still pond, and every wet ditch across the whole of the world, trailing its long, thin, drooping branches down toward the water. A tree of the wet places and the river banks, graceful and weeping and known to every child. It is the willow, and the bark of the willow was, for the pilgrim and for the whole of the old world, the great medicine against the fever and against the deep aching pain of the worn and weary body. Think of the fevers of the road. The traveller crossed a river in the rain and took a deep chill and woke in the night burning hot and shaking cold at once, his head pounding, his whole body aching as though it had been beaten. He passed through the low, wet country, the marshes and the river meadows where the air was thick and bad, and there a particular fever waited, a fever that came and went in waves, the cold shaking and then the burning heat, and then the drenching sweat, returning every few days, the fever of the marshes, which haunted the low damp stretches of the great roads and laid low so many travellers who had to cross them. And there was the fever that rose in any wound gone bad, in any sickness taking hold, the body's own heat turned against itself, climbing higher and higher, and a high fever in that age, with no way to bring it down, could burn a person into raving and into death. To cool the fever, to bring down the burning heat, to ease the deep aching pain that came with it, was one of the great needs of the road, and against all of it, the traveller reached for the bitter grey bark of the weeping tree. The way he used it was to make of it a bitter tea, for the bark needed steeping to give up its goodness, and so this was a remedy for the evening, for the time of rest, when the fevered pilgrim had reached some shelter, some barn or hostel or wayside cell, and could set a little water to heat. He broke the dried bark into small pieces and steeped it long in the hot water until the water turned dark and bitter, and then he drank it down, that clean astringent bitterness, and waited, and the old people knew, across a great span of time, that the bitter bark of the willow truly did cool the fever and ease the ache, that a body burning and aching would, after the bitter cup, grow cooler and easier, the heat sinking, the pounding in the head fading, the deep beaten ache in the limbs softening into something a person could bear and even sleep through. And here is a thing worth holding gently in the dark, for it is one of the quiet marvels of the old medicine. The willow bark truly does hold within it the very thing, or very near the very thing, that we ourselves still take to this day against pain and fever, the bitter substance that the willow makes in its bark, which the old herbalists found by patient watching long before any chemist could name it, so that the pilgrim steeping his bitter bark by the fire, and the modern soul reaching for the little tablet in the cabinet are, across all the centuries, reaching for the same quiet mercy, the same gift of the weeping tree. I will be a little careful, as I always am, and say that the old willow tea was a rough and uneven thing, that the strength of it varied from tree to tree and from batch to batch, that the pilgrim could not measure it as we measure, and that it did not always work and could not save the worst of the fevers. But on a great many ordinary fevers, the chill caught at the river, the ache of the over-walked body, the rising heat of a small sickness, the bitter bark did real and welcome good, and the traveller trusted it, and carried it, peeled and dried, against the day the heat should rise in him, in some cold barn far from home. And I would have you understand the fever a little better before we go to the pilgrim burning in the dark, for the fever was a different kind of enemy than the wound or the broken bone, an enemy that came from within and could not be bound or splinted or pressed upon. And the bitter bark was the only weapon the traveller had against it. The fever followed the wet places above all, the low river valleys and the marshes and the standing water, where the air hung thick and bad, and a particular shaking, returning fever waited, that the old people knew well and dreaded, the fever that came in waves, the cold violent shaking, and then the burning heat, and then the drenching sweat, and then a day or two of false recovery, and then the whole terrible cycle again, returning and returning until it had worn the traveller down to nothing. And the great roads could not always go around the wet places, for the rivers had to be followed to their fords, and the low valleys had to be crossed. And so the pilgrim, again and again, had to walk through exactly the country where the fever waited, and breathe its thick bad air, and drink its standing water, and lie down at night in its damp. And the season turned the screw, for the fevers of the marshes were worst in the late summer and the early autumn, in the very months when the great companies were walking home, when the heat had bred the sickness up to its full strength in the standing water and the thick warm air, so that the homeward traveller, already worn by months of road, had to pass through the fever country at the very time the fever was at its deadliest. And when it took him, there was no fine sick room, and no skilled physician, and no cool, clean bed, only whatever poor shelter the day had brought him to, a barn, a hostel floor, a wayside cell, a hedge, and there he had to lie and burn and shake, and sweat with no help but the bitter bark in his bag, and the mercy of God, and bring himself, if he could, to break the bark into the little pot, and steep it dark and bitter and drink it down, and wait alone in the dark for the bitter mercy of the weeping tree to bring the burning down. It was a lonely and a frightening sickness to bear so far from home, the fever in the dark, and the bitter bark was a cold comfort, but it was a true one, and many a homeward pilgrim owed his life to the grey curls of bark his careful hands had peeled and dried back in the spring against exactly this dark hour. So picture him there at the last. It is deep night in a poor shelter on the road, and a pilgrim lies on the straw burning with fever, his teeth chattering even as the sweat runs off him, his head a great drum of pain, alone, frightened, far from any help but the bag at his side. And he has strength enough to break the bitter bark into the little pot of water the hostel keeper has heated for him, and to wait, shivering, while it steeps dark, and to lift the bitter cup to his cracked lips and drink it down. And in the long hours of the night, the bitter mercy of the willow works in him, and the burning sinks, slow degree by slow degree, and the pounding in his head softens, and the deep ache eases, and at last, near dawn, cooler and easier and emptied out, he falls into a true and healing sleep. That is the seventh plant, the bark that cooled the fever of the marshes. Let it rest, and let us reach into the bag once more, for there is a gentler fever herb in here too, and it smells, I promise you, far sweeter than the bitter bark. The next thing my fingers find is soft and fragrant, a bundle of dried flowering tops so sweet, smelling that even now, dried and old, they fill the small circle of the candlelight with a faint and lovely scent, a scent of honey and of new mown hay, and of the warm summer meadow where they grew. They are the creamy, frothy flower, heads of a tall and graceful plant that grows in the wet meadows and along the damp ditches, and the marshy edges of the slow rivers, standing waist, high in the long grass with great soft clusters of tiny cream, white flowers that foam and froth at the top of the stem like spilled milk, and that fill a whole damp meadow in the height of summer, with a sweetness you can smell from far off across the field. The old people loved this plant for its sweetness above almost all others, and they strewed it across the floors of their houses to make the close air sweet, and they laid it among their linens, and they called it the Queen of the Meadow, and the sweet hay, and the bride of the meadow, and we know it as meadow sweet, and it was the gentler, kinder sister of the bitter willow bark, a fever herb that smelled of honey instead of bark. For here is a kindness in the old medicine that I have always loved, that for so many of the harsh, strong remedies, there was also a gentle one, a softer thing for the weaker body, for the child, for the old, for the stomach too tender to bear the bitter cup. And where the willow bark was bitter and astringent, and rough upon a sour stomach, the meadow sweet did much of the same good work, the easing of the fever and the calming of the ache, but it did it sweetly and gently and kindly upon the belly, and indeed it did the belly a particular good of its own. For the meadow sweet was, above its other virtues, the great friend of the sour and churning stomach, the herb for the gut turned acid and burning, for the heartburn and the sorring, and the gnawing that came from the poor strange food of the road, from the rough bread, and the turned wine, and the cold meat eaten in haste, and a pilgrim whose belly burned and sawed after a bad meal, who could not have stomached the harsh bitterness of wormwood or willow, could take the sweet meadow herb and find the burning soothed, the sorring calmed, the gnawing eased, and his rest restored. And I have always loved how the old people treasured this plant for its sweetness alone, quite apart from its healing. For they strewed its frothy heads across the floors of their houses to make the close-shut air of winter sweet, and they laid it among their stored linens, and they scattered it in the places where people gathered, so that the smell of it, that honey and hay sweetness of the summer meadow, became for them the very smell of cleanliness and freshness and good cheer. And a pilgrim who carried it carried a little of that sweetness with him into all the foul and close and weary places of the road, the stinking hostels and the damp barns and the crowded ship holds a small breath of the clean summer meadow folded into his bag against all the staleness of the way. There is a tenderness in that, a sense of the old people reaching, even in their hardest and dirtiest circumstances, for sweetness and freshness, and a little beauty. And the meadow sweet gave it to them freely, the queen of the meadow, as generous with its sweetness as it was with its healing. And the traveller who steeped its honey, scented tea at the end of a hard day, was treating not only his fever and his sour belly, but his weary senses and his worn spirit, giving himself, in that fragrant golden cup, a small and lovely kindness in the midst of a hard life. And it holds, this sweet plant of the wet meadows, a quiet secret very like the willow's own. For the meadow sweet too carries within its froth of cream white flowers, a kindred power to ease pain and to cool the fever, akin to the very thing the willow holds in its bark, akin to the gentle mercy we ourselves still keep in the medicine cabinet against an aching head and a feverish night, so that here again, across all the long centuries, the pilgrim wandering through the wet summer meadow, and stooping to gather a few of the sweet frothy heads was reaching, all unknowing, for the same quiet gift that we reach for still, only wrapped this time not in bitter bark, but in the honey sweetness of the queen of the meadow. And the old people, who knew nothing of why, knew everything of weather, and they trusted the sweet plant, and they used it gently, and they were right to. The way of it was as soft and easy as the plant itself, for the meadow sweet wanted only to be steeped, the dried sweet flowers and leaves laid in hot water to make a fragrant golden tea, faintly sweet, faintly of honey and of hay, a tea so pleasant that the taking of it was itself a comfort, a small kindness to the senses at the end of a hard day. And the pilgrim who walked through the low wet country, through the river meadows and the marshy stretches where the fever of the damp air waited, gathered the sweet heads as he passed in the long days of summer, when the whole meadow foamed cream, white, and the scent of it hung warm in the air, and dried them, and carried them. And when the fever came on him, or the deep ache of the overwalked body, or the sour burning of the belly after a poor meal, he steeped the fragrant heads and drank the honey, sweet tea, and was eased, gently, kindly, without the harshness of the stronger herbs. It was the herb for the tender body and the gentle evening, the sweet companion of the wet meadow, and many a pilgrim carried both it and the willow, the bitter and the sweet, the strong and the gentle, and chose between them as the day and the body required, the harsh bark for the hard high fever, the sweet meadow flower for the milder heat and the soaring belly, and the times when kindness was the better medicine. And I would have you linger a moment in the wet summer meadows where this sweet plant grew, for the season and the place are half the story of it. The meadow sweet was a plant of the high summer above all, of the few warm weeks when the wet meadows stood deep in long grass, and the whole low country foamed with its cream white froth, and it filled the warm still air in those weeks with a honey sweetness you could smell from far across the field, so that a pilgrim walking the river roads in July walked, for mile after mile, through a sweetness that lifted the heart even as the heat wore down the body. And those very same wet summer meadows were, you will remember, the haunt of the marsh fever and the soaring belly, the low damp country the traveller had to cross and dreaded crossing. And so there was a kind of quiet justice in it, that the very ground that bred the fever and sod the stomach should also grow, in such abundance the sweet, gentle herb that eased them both, the cure foaming up cream, white across the very meadows that held the sickness. And it was a herb the traveller gathered as he walked, in those few sweet weeks, stooping into the long grass to take a double handful of the frothy heads and dry them against the rest of the year. For the meadow sweet would not keep its sweetness forever, and the wise pilgrim laid in his store, while the meadows were in their full white foam. And the body it served was the tender body, the body too worn, or too young, or too old, or too sour, stomach to bear the harsh bitter herbs, and so the meadow sweet was, in a way, the herb of mercy among the fevered plants, the one a mother could give a feverish child on the road, the one an old pilgrim with a delicate stomach could take without dread, the one for the times when what was wanted was not a sharp correction, but a sweet kindness, a soft easing, a gentle lowering of the heat, and a gentle settling of the burning belly. And to drink it was itself a pleasure, the warm golden honey, scented tea, a small sweetness in a hard life, a kindness to the senses at the end of a hard day. And I think the old people loved it as much for that pleasure as for its virtues, the queen of the meadow that smelled of summer and tasted of honey and eased the worn body sweetly down toward rest. So picture a pilgrim in high summer, on the road through the low green country of central France, where the slow river winds through wide flat water, meadows, and the air hangs thick and sweet and warm. She has walked all morning beside the river, and her stomach has burned, and soured all day from the rough sharp wine, and the hard cheese of last nights pour in. A low gnawing fire under her ribs that has taken the joy out of the walking, and the strength out of her step. And as she comes through a wet meadow, in the slanting afternoon light, the whole field foams cream, white all around her, waist high, and the honey sweetness of it rises up warm and thick on the still air, and she knows it at once, the queen of the meadow, the sweet hay. And she wades a little way in among the long grass and gathers a double handful of the frothy heads. And that evening, in a kinder shelter than the last, she steeps them in a little hot water, and the small bowl fills with the golden fragrant tea, and she drinks it slowly, the honey sweetness of the summer meadow on her tongue, and the burning under her ribs softens and cools and fades, and the sour gnawing settles, and her tired body eases, and she sits in the last warm light with the sweet tea inside her, and the sweet scent still on her hands, and is, for a little while, at peace. That is the 8th plant, the sweet meadow herb for the soaring stomach. Let it rest now, soft and fragrant, in the warm dark, and let us reach into the bag again. The next thing my fingers find is a bundle of green leaves, soft and a little furred, narrow and pebbled in their texture like the surface of fine old leather. And when I crush one gently between my fingers, there rises a strong, warm, savory, slightly bitter scent, a clean and ancient smell that you may know from your own kitchen. For this plant, too, has never left us. It is one of the most honored herbs in all the long history of the garden, a plant the old people held in such high regard that they built whole sayings and whole beliefs around it, asking, in an old rhyme, how a man could ever die who had sage growing in his garden, for they reckoned it the very herb of long life and of health and of strength, the herb of the wise, and they planted it by every cottage door and tended it carefully, and it stands there still in the gardens of the world. It is the sage, and it was the pilgrim's herb of the mouth and the throat and the failing strength, the herb he carried against the slow wearing down of the long, long road. For there is a misery of the road I have not yet spoken of, quieter than the fevers and the fluxes, but no less real, and that is the slow grinding wear of it upon the whole body and the whole spirit, the way that month upon month of hard walking and poor food and broken sleep and exposure to all weathers slowly drained the traveller down, thinned him, weakened him, wore at his teeth and his gums and his throat and his strength, until the pilgrim who arrived at the far shrine was often a gaunt and hollowed shadow of the one who had set out. The mouth suffered in particular ways. The poor diet and the rough water rotted and loosened the teeth and inflamed the gums, and a mouth full of sore and bleeding gums and aching teeth was a daily torment that made the eating of even poor food a misery. The throat suffered from the dust of the dry roads, and the cold of the high passes, and the damp of the wet country, growing raw and sore and hoarse. And the whole body, worn thin, seemed to lose its hold on its own strength, to grow weak and low, and dispirited in a way the traveller felt in every part of him. And against all of this slow wearing the pilgrim reached for the honoured green leaf, the herb of long life. The sage was used in more ways than almost any plant in the bag, for it served the worn body at several points at once. For the sore mouth and the bleeding gums and the aching tooth, the traveller chewed the leaf directly, working it slowly around the sore places, and the strong astringent goodness of it tightened and cleaned the inflamed gums, and eased the soreness and freshened the foul mouth. And the old people indeed chewed sage to clean the teeth and sweeten the breath as a daily care, so that the pilgrim chewing his sage leaf at the side of the road was tending his mouth much as we tend ours, and to better effect than you might think, for the sage truly does work against the soreness and the corruption of the mouth. For the raw and hoarse and aching throat, the traveller steeped the leaves in hot water to make a warm savoury tea, and gargled it and drank it, and the warmth and the strength of it soothed the rawness and eased the soreness, and let the aching throat rest. And for the whole worn and weakened body, the old people believed, and not without reason, that the sage strengthened and steadied and restored, that it was a tonic to the low and the failing, a herb that gave back something of the strength the road had taken. And so the pilgrim drank his sage tea, not only against the sore throat, but against the very weariness of his bones, against the slow draining away of himself on the endless road, and felt, or believed he felt, and perhaps truly did feel, a little of his strength come back. And the sage was thought, too, to preserve, to keep the body sound against corruption and decay, which is much of why the old people tied it so closely to long life. And they used it to keep their meat from spoiling and their bodies from sickening. And a pilgrim far from home, watching the road wear him thinner by the week, took comfort in the herb that the old rhyme said could hold death itself at bay, and chewed it, and drank it, and kept a little of it always by him, the green leaf of long life, the steady old friend of the worn and weary traveller. And I would have you feel the long slow wearing down that the sage was carried against, for it was not a single crisis like a wound or a fever, but the whole accumulated weight of the journey upon the body across all its many months, and that weight was its own kind of danger. Think of the traveller at the start, strong and full and fresh, his cheeks round, his teeth sound, his step springing, and then think of the same man season upon season later, far down the road, after the spring mud and the summer dust and the autumn rains, after 100 poor meals and 100 broken nights and 100 miles too many, and you will see a different body altogether, thinned, greyed, hollowed at the cheek, his teeth loosening and his gums sore from the rough diet and the rougher water, his throat raw from the dust and the cold, his whole frame worn down toward the bone, and his spirit worn down with it. That slow erosion took more pilgrims in the end than any single dramatic peril, for the worn and weakened body was the body that fell first to every fever and every flux and every chill, and the traveller felt it happening to himself, felt himself being ground down by the road week by week, and feared it, and reached for the honoured leaf to hold it off. And the sage was, more than any of the others, the herb of home carried into the far country, for it grew by every cottage door in the lands the pilgrims came from, planted and tended and beloved, the herb of the kitchen and the herb of long life, and the traveller who chewed it on a far road was chewing the very taste of his own doorstep. The savoury familiar strength of the herb his mother and his grandmother had grown, and that taste of home was its own quiet medicine to the homesick worn down spirit, a small daily return in the mouth to the safe place he had left so far behind. And it carried with it the old rhyme, half a prayer, that asked how any soul could die who had sage growing in his garden, and the pilgrim far from his garden, chewing the leaf he had carried from it, held to that old promise as a man holds to a thread of hope, and felt, whether by the herb or the hope or the taste of home, or all three together, a little of his strength and a little of his heart come back to him, enough to shoulder the pack again and walk on toward the shrine that was, surely by now, drawing a little closer. So let us stand beside one such, late in a long pilgrimage, far down the road and far worn by it. It is a man who set out months ago strong and full, and who is now thin and grey and hollow, cheek, his teeth aching, his gums sore and bleeding, so that the eating of his bread is a daily pain, his throat raw from 100 dusty miles, his whole body worn low, and his spirit worn low with it. And some mornings he wonders honestly whether he has the strength left in him to reach the shrine at all. But he has, folded in the bottom of his bag, a good store of the grey, green leaf, for he is a wise traveller, and he packed it knowing the road would wear him so. And each evening now he makes his small ritual of it. He picks a leaf and chews it slowly, working it around his sore and bleeding gums, and the soreness eases and the foulness clears, and his mouth is clean again. And he steeps a few leaves in his little pot and drinks the warm savoury tea, gargling it first against his raw throat and then swallowing it down warm into his hollow belly. And he feels the warmth of it spread through him, and he tells himself the old rhyme, half a prayer now, about the man who cannot die who has sage in his garden, and he feels, whether by the herb or by the hope, or by both together, a little of his strength and a little of his heart come back. And in the morning he gets up, gaunt and grey but mended a little, and shoulders his pack, and goes on toward the shrine, kept on his feet, in some quiet measure, by the honoured old leaf of long life. That is the 9th plant. The grey, green leaf of long life. Let it rest, and let us reach into the bag again. For the last 3 plants are for the part of the pilgrim the road wore hardest of all, which was not, in the end, the body. And of all the things the road wore down, the heaviest, in the end, was not the body but the mind. And so the last 3 plants in the bag are the ones I have always held to be the most tender and the most needful, and the ones I would most wish you to carry yourself in your own way, along your own road. For they are the plants for the worn and frightened and sleepless spirit, the plants for the part of the traveller that no poultice could reach. Let me speak a little of that worn spirit before I lift the plants out, for I would have you feel why these last 3 mattered so. You must understand what it was to be a pilgrim in the matter of the heart and the mind, and not only in the matter of the feet and the belly. The traveller had left everything he knew. He had walked out of the only village he had ever seen, away from the faces he had known all his life, away from his own bed and his own hearth, and his own small fields, and the church where his people were buried, and he had gone out alone, or nearly alone, into a vast and strange and dangerous world, among people whose speech he could not understand, and whose ways were not his ways, with no certainty at all that he would ever come home again. He was tired in a way that went far deeper than the body, the bone-deep weariness of the long, endless effort, the same sun coming up each morning, on the same hard road still to be walked, week upon week upon week, the shrine never seeming to come any closer. He was homesick, with that particular hollow ache for home that no medicine in the world can truly cure. He was afraid of the robbers and the fevers and the pestilence and the cold mountains and the deep sea and the simple chance of dying alone and unburied in a ditch far from anyone who loved him. And he was, very often, unbearably alone, even in a crowd, even in a packed and snoring hostel, alone inside his own frightened head in the dark. And the days had a sameness to them that wore at the spirit in its own slow way, for the pilgrim rose in the grey before the dawn, while the others in the hostel were still stirring, and tended his feet, and ate whatever poor thing there was to break the night's fast, and shouldered his pack, and went out onto the road, and walked, and walked, and walked, through the morning and the heat of the noon, and the long, slow decline of the afternoon, the same road unrolling ahead of him, the same fields, the same hills, the same far horizon that never seemed to come any nearer, until the light began to fail, and it was time to look for the next shelter and begin the whole hard evening again. And the next day was the same, and the day after that, and the day after that, for weeks, for months, the same rising, the same walking, the same searching for shelter, the same lying down among strangers. And there is a particular weariness that comes from sameness itself, from the endless repetition of effort with no visible end. That is different from the weariness of the body, and that can wear a soul down even faster, the grey grinding sameness of the long, long road. And the only thing that held against it, the one bright thread the pilgrim clung to through all the grey sameness, was the thought of the shrine, the holy place at the far end of it all, the goal he had set out for, growing, surely, however slowly, a little nearer with each of these endless identical days, and the dream of the moment he would come over the last hill and see it at last, the towers of the holy city, the great church of the saint, the end and the meaning of the whole long road. He carried that dream the way he carried his herbs, a thing to reach for in the dark hours, a medicine of the spirit against the grey sameness of the days. And the herbs of the spirit that we are about to lift out worked alongside that dream, soothing and quieting and steadying the worn traveller so that he could keep his eyes, day after grey day, on the bright far thread of the shrine and keep walking toward it. And worst of all, in some ways, the worn and frightened spirit could not rest. For the deepest cruelty of the road, the one that ground the traveller down more surely than any other, was that he could not sleep. Night after night he lay in strange and wretched places, on the bare floor of a crowded hostel among 100 coughing, snoring strangers, on a heap of filthy straw in a stranger's barn, on the cold, hard ground under a hedge with one eye open against the dark, in the foul-packed hold of a heaving ship, and his body cried out for rest, and his racing fearful mind would not give it to him. He lay awake listening to the breathing of strangers and the small sounds in the dark that might be thieves or might be rats or might be nothing, his heart going too fast, his mind running round and round its worn track of fears. And the more desperately he needed the sleep, the more the sleep fled from him, and he rose each grey morning more hollowed than the last, to walk another 20 miles on no rest at all. And a man worn down by sleeplessness is a man near the end of himself, weak and fearful, and prey to every other sickness, his judgment gone, his strength gone, his hope going. And so the herbs that could quiet the frightened mind and bring on the blessed sleep were, for the pilgrim, very nearly the most precious of all. The difference, sometimes, between going on and lying down in the road for good. So it is with a particular tenderness that I lift out the last 3 plants, and the first of them is the gentlest, the kindest, the one for the daylight unwinding, and the soft soothing of the frayed and tired soul before ever the deep dark of sleep is reached. It is a small handful of little dried flowers, no larger than the nail of your smallest finger, each one a tiny daisy with a low golden dome of a center and a ring of small white petals, faded now to cream and pale gold, and when I roll them gently in my palm, there rises the loveliest scent of all the plants in the bag, a soft, warm, sweet scent, a little like apples, a little like hay, a scent so mild and so comforting that the smelling of it is itself half the cure. These are the flowers of a low spreading plant that grows close to the ground in the dry sunny places, in the trodden field edges and the bare waste ground and the very paths, lifting up its little gold and white daisy flowers everywhere a foot might fall, so that the pilgrim could gather it like the way bread along the very road he walked. It is the chamomile, the little sunflower of the wayside, and it was the herb of the gentle evening, the soft soother of the tired body and the frayed mind, the kindest plant in all the bag. The chamomile was used against so many small miseries that it is hard to know where to begin, for it was the great gentle calmer and easer of the body, a herb of mild and many-sided kindness, and the pilgrim reached for it not against one great enemy, but against the whole accumulated wear of the day, for the tired and aching belly, churning still from the poor food, but too tender now for the bitter herbs. The chamomile made a soft golden tea that settled and soothed and quieted the gut, easing the gripe and the wind and the gnawing as gently as a hand laid on a child's brow, so that it was the herb above all for the stomach that needed not a sharp correction, but only a kindness, for the tired and inflamed eyes, sore and gritty from the dust of 100 dry miles, and the smoke of 100 poor fires, and the strain of watching the long road in all weathers, the traveller steeped the little flowers, and let the warm infusion cool, and bathed his sore eyes with it, or laid the warm, soft, steeped flowers themselves over his closed lids, and the soreness and the grittiness eased, and the tired eyes were soothed and rested. For the small aches and the stiff and weary muscles, the chamomile steeped warm could be used to bathe the sore place, easing the stiffness, drawing out the ache, and above all, the chamomile soothed the spirit, for it was the great gentle calmer of the frayed and anxious and worn down mind, and the warm sweet golden tea, drunk slowly in the quiet of the evening, eased the day's accumulated fear and grief and weariness, loosened the knot of anxiety in the chest, slowed the racing thoughts, and prepared the troubled traveller gently for the rest he so badly needed. This is the plant of the in between time, you see, the herb not of the crisis but of the unwinding, not of the high fever or the deep wound or the killing flux, but of the soft, difficult hour at the end of a hard day, when the body is too tired and too sore and too wound up to find its way down into rest. And that hour on the long pilgrim road came every single evening, and was its own quiet trial, and the chamomile met it every evening with its soft kindness. The pilgrim, having reached at last whatever poor shelter the day allowed, having eased off his shoes, and tended his feet, and eaten his poor supper, would gather a few of the little gold flowers, dried from his own store or picked fresh from the very ground outside the door, and steep them in his cup of hot water, and the soft, sweet apple scent would rise and fill the small space around him, and he would drink the warm golden tea slowly, and feel the day begin, at last, to loosen its grip. The aching belly would settle, the sore eyes, bathed in the warm infusion, would ease, the stiff muscles would soften, and the frayed and frightened mind, soothed by the warmth and the sweetness and the long familiar comfort of it, would slowly begin to let go of the fears of the day, so that when at last he lay down on the straw, he might, with the gentle chamomile working in him, find his way down toward sleep, instead of lying rigid and racing in the dark. And there is something in the very smell of the chamomile that I would have you carry into your own rest tonight, for the smell of it was half its medicine, that soft, warm, sweet scent, a little like apples, and a little like new hay, the gentlest scent of all the plants in the bag. And the old people knew, in their own way, that a gentle and familiar and beloved smell can soothe a troubled spirit almost before any other virtue of the plant has had time to work. The one pilgrim, steeping his little gold flowers at the end of a hard day, breathed that soft apple, sweetness first, before ever he tasted the tea, and the smell alone began to ease him. For it was the smell of every gentle evening he had ever known, the smell of home and of safety and of rest, drifting up warm in the dark of a strange place far away, and it reached past all his fear and weariness to the quiet child inside him, and told that child, gently, that it was time now to let the day go. There is a whole kindness folded into a smell like that, a kindness the old people understood and reached for, and I would have you remember it, that the gentlest things, a soft scent, a warm cup held in both hands, a quiet old voice in the dark, can do as much for a troubled spirit as the strongest medicine, sometimes more, and that you may give yourself such kindnesses freely, tonight and always, the way the pilgrim gave himself the little gold flowers at the end of his long road. And it was a safe herb, a mild herb, a herb that did no harm, which mattered greatly. For a traveller far from any physician, could not afford to be experimenting with strong and dangerous things upon his own body. And the chamomile he could take freely, take every evening, give even to a sick child or a failing old companion, without fear, and that safety, that gentleness, that reliability, was much of why the old people loved it so, and grew it by every door, and carried it on every journey. It asked nothing, and it harmed nothing, and it gave its soft kindness to anyone who reached for it. The little sunflower of the wayside, the herb of the tired evening, and I have always thought it the most lovable of all the plants in the bag, the one I would most wish to press into the hand of anyone I cared for who was setting out on any hard road, of any kind, anywhere. And I would have you sit a while longer in that soft, difficult hour of the evening, the hour the little sunflower was made for, because it was an hour that came every single day of the long road, and that asked, every single day, its own quiet toll. Imagine it. The pilgrim has walked since the grey of dawn, 20 miles and more, through whatever the day has sent, and now the light is going gold and then grey, and he has reached, at last, some place to stop, a hospice if he is fortunate, a barn or a hedge if he is not. And the stopping, you would think, should be a simple relief. But it is not entirely, for now that the walking is done, and there is nothing left to do but rest, the whole accumulated weight of the day comes down on him at once, the aching of the overworked limbs, the soreness of the wind-stung eyes, the gnawing of the under-fed belly, and underneath all of it, rising now that the day's distraction is gone, the deeper aches, the homesickness, the loneliness, the cold low hum of fear, the gathering dread of another sleepless night. It is a hard hour, the hour between the walking and the sleeping, harder in its quiet way than the walking itself, and the chamomile was the herb that met it. And the hospices, those kind religious houses that took in the travellers along the great roads, knew the chamomile well and grew it and used it. For the work of a hospice was exactly the work of that soft, difficult hour, the receiving of the worn and frightened traveller at the end of his hard day, and the easing of him toward rest. And the little gold flowers were a part of how it was done, steeped into a warm sweet tea, and pressed into the tired traveller's hands as he sat against the cool stone wall in the gathering dark. There was a whole gentle art of hospitality bound up in that small cup, the art of meeting a stranger at the end of his strength with warmth and sweetness, and a thing that asked nothing of him and only soothed. And the chamomile was at the heart of it, the kindest herb in the kindest hour, the little sunflower that gathered up the scattered worn-out pilgrim and smoothed him gently down toward the deeper rest the night might bring. So let us stand gently beside a pilgrim in the soft, difficult hour of the evening, near the end of a long, hard day. It is dusk, and she has come at last to a small hospice on the road, one of the kind religious houses that took in the travellers, and she has been given a place on the floor and a bowl of thin soup. And she has eased off her broken shoes and tended her sore feet, and now she sits with her back against the cool stone wall in the gathering dark, and the weariness comes down on her like a great grey weight, body and mind together, the aching of the overworked limbs and the sore grittiness of the wind-stung eyes and underneath it all, the deep hollow ache of homesickness and the low cold hum of fear that has walked beside her all the long day. And she takes from her bag a small twist of the little gold and white flowers gathered along the road that very afternoon, and a kind lay sister brings her a cup of hot water, and she steeps the flowers in it, and the soft sweet apple scent rises up around her in the dark, the scent of every gentle evening she has ever known, and she lifts the warm cup in both her tired hands and drinks the golden tea slowly, breathing in the sweetness of it. And the warmth spreads through her, and the knot in her chest begins at last to loosen, and the racing of her thoughts begins to slow, and she bathes her sore tired eyes with the last of the warm infusion, and lays her head back against the cool stone, and feels the long hard day at last beginning to let her go. And when, a little later, she lies down on the straw in the dark among the other sleeping travelers, the gentle chamomile is working softly in her still, easing her down, smoothing the way, so that the sleep, when it comes a little easier than it has in many nights. That is the 10th plant, the little sunflower for the tired evening. Let it rest now, soft and sweet and gold, in the warm dark, and let your own breath grow slower with the saying of it, and let us reach, very gently, for the second of the spirit plants, the one for the deep dark of the sleepless night itself. The next thing my fingers find is a root again, but not like the warm fiery root from the east, and not like the dark knitting root of the cold pass, for this is a pale tangled clump of small roots and rootlets, dried and a little brittle, and when I lift it from the bag and bring it near the candle, there rises from it a smell that is, I will be honest with you, a strange one, a heavy, earthy, musky smell that some find unpleasant, and that the old people said the cats loved above all things, rolling in it in a kind of rapture wherever it grew. It is the root of a tall plant of the damp places, a plant with feathery divided leaves and clusters of small pale pink or white flowers held up high on its tall stems in the early summer, growing by the stream sides and the wet ditches and the moist edges of the woods. And for all the strangeness of its smell, this root was, among all the plants in the bag, the great and trusted bringer of sleep, the deep, quiet root that the troubled and sleepless traveler reached for in the worst of the dark hours, when even the gentle chamomile was not enough. It is the valerian, and it was the herb for the sleepless night and the frightened heart. I told you a little before of the sleeplessness of the road, but let me sit with it a moment longer, for it was a deeper and crueler trouble than the daytime weariness, and the valerian was the answer to its very deepest reach. Picture the pilgrim at the true bottom of the night, not in the soft, difficult dusk that the chamomile soothed, but in the black middle of the dark, hours into a night he should have been sleeping through, lying rigid and wide-eyed on the floor of a crowded hostel or a stranger's barn, his body screaming with exhaustion and his mind utterly, helplessly awake. All around him in the dark are the sounds of strangers, the snoring and the coughing and the muttering, the rustle of someone turning, the small frightening sounds that might be a thief's hand reaching for a bag, or might be nothing at all, and he lies there with his heart going much too fast, his thoughts racing round and round their worn track of fear and grief and longing for home, doing the terrible arithmetic of the sleepless, counting the hours until the grey dawn. knowing he must walk 20 miles tomorrow, and that he will have to walk them on no rest, feeling himself coming apart at the seams from the sheer want of sleep. And the more he needs it, the further it flees. The harder he reaches for it, the more it shrinks away. There is a particular despair in that, the despair of the exhausted soul who cannot rest, and it walked the pilgrim roads like a ghost, hollowing the travellers out night by night, and against its very deepest reach the old people set the strange, smelling root of the valerian. For the valerian was understood, across a great span of time and in many lands, to be the herb that could quiet the over-wakeful mind and the over-racing heart, and let the sleep that fled return. And it was used for exactly that, to calm the troubled and anxious and sleepless, to settle the nerves wound too tight, to soothe the heart that would not slow, and to bring on gently but deeply the rest that the body so badly needed. The old writers ranked it among the great quieters of the spirit, naming it together with the chamomile and a few other gentle herbs as the plants that could tame the troubled spirit and calm the pain and bring on sleep. And of all of them the valerian reached the deepest, was the strongest, was the one for the night, when nothing milder would serve. And here again, as with the willow and the meadowsweet, the old people had found by patient watching a truth we have only later been able to confirm. For the valerian root does hold within it a real power to quiet the mind and ease the body towards sleep, a true and gentle calming, so that the pilgrim steeping his strange, smelling root by the last embers of the fire was reaching for a real, and not merely a hoped, for rest. The way of it was to steep the dried root, for the root was where the strength lay, and the pilgrim broke a little of the brittle tangled root into his cup of hot water and let it steep a good while, until the water took up the heavy earthy strength of it, and then, despite the strangeness of the smell and the strangeness of the taste, he drank it down in the quiet of the evening, before he lay down against the long dark night ahead. And as he lay down on the straw, the deep quiet root would begin its slow gentle work in him, easing the racing of his heart, loosening the grip of his fears, smoothing out the wound-up tangle of his nerves, drawing the wakeful mind down at last toward the dark, and the sleep that had fled him night after night would steal back and take him, and hold him through the dark hours, so that he woke in the grey dawn not hollowed and ruined but rested, mended a little, restored enough to walk another day. And that, on the long pilgrim road, was no small miracle, but a very great one, for sleep, as the old wise physicians always said, is the great mender of the body, the deep nightly repair of all that the day has worn. And a traveller who could find his sleep could survive almost anything, and a traveller who could not would be ground down in the end by the wanting of it. And so the strange, smelling root that gave the sleep back was, in its quiet way, a guardian of the very life. I will say, gently, that it was a strong herb, and not one to be taken carelessly, and the old people knew this, and used it with respect, a little at a time, against the real need, and not the small one. And a wise traveller kept it for the worst nights, the nights when the fear and the grief and the exhaustion combined into something that would not let him rest at all, and did not waste it on the merely restless evenings that the chamomile could soothe. But against those worst nights, the truly sleepless, truly frightened, truly desperate nights that came to every pilgrim on every long road, The deep, quiet route was a mercy beyond price, and many a traveller who would otherwise have come apart from the sheer, accumulated want of sleep was carried through by the strange, smelling route that the cats so loved, the deep, quiet bringer of the rest that mends. And there is a tenderness in this herb beyond even its great usefulness, for of all the plants in the bag it is the one that speaks most directly to the part of us that is afraid in the dark, the frightened child that lives in every grown soul, and that wakes in the black middle of the night far from home. And the Valerian reached for that frightened child and quieted it, and held it, and let it sleep. And there is something in that I find almost unbearably gentle, the thought of all those frightened, lonely travellers across all those centuries, lying in all those strange, dark places, soothed down into sleep at last by the patient old root that asked nothing of them, and only quieted their racing hearts and let them rest. And I would have you know that the old people understood the worth of sleep in a way our own restless age has half forgotten, for they held it to be one of the great pillars of health, named alongside good air and good food and good rest and a quiet mind, as one of the things a body must have to stay whole. And the wise physicians wrote at length on the care of sleep, on how to court it and how to keep it, and how to mend it when it failed. They knew that a body that slept well could bear almost anything, and that a body kept long from sleep would sicken and fail. And so the herbs that guarded sleep were, in their eyes, not small comforts but true and serious medicines, guardians of one of the very pillars on which a life stood. And the Valerian was the strongest of those guardians, the one for the deepest failure of sleep, and they kept it, and respected it, and reached for it when the gentler things had failed, as a physician reaches for his surest remedy when the lesser ones have not served. There is a wisdom in that I would gently commend to you, even tonight, in your own age and your own bed, the old wisdom that sleep is not a luxury and not a weakness but a pillar of the whole life, the great mender, the deep nightly repair, a thing to be honoured and courted and protected, and let go into gladly, the way the worn pilgrim, with the quiet root working in him at last, let himself go down into it gratefully in the dark. It is, I think, the most human of all the plants in the bag, the one for the deepest and most universal of all the road's miseries, which is simply to be alone and afraid in the dark and unable to sleep, a misery the pilgrim knew, and a misery you may know yourself even tonight, even now, in your own bed, in your own dark, far from any pilgrim road. And I would have you understand the sleepless inn a little more deeply before we go to the pilgrim at the bottom of the night, for it was a particular and a terrible place, the crowded hostel in the dark, and the Valerian was carried against everything that happened there. Picture the long, low room, the floor strewn with straw, and on the straw, packed close, a dozen or a score of strangers, travellers from a dozen far places, some sick, some snoring, some coughing the deep coughs of the road, some muttering in tongues the pilgrim cannot understand, all of them strangers, all of them in the dark, half feared. There is no privacy and no safety, for the small thieving hands of the road reach out in the dark toward the bags of the sleeping, and the pilgrim must sleep, if he sleeps at all, with his hand upon his bag and one ear open against the dark, and that is no way to find true rest. And there is the cold, and the hardness of the floor, and the strangeness of it all, the strangeness that the body cannot quite let its guard down inside, so far from the one bed it knows in the one room it was born to. And into that hard place the pilgrim brought his whole worn, frightened self, his exhausted body that needed sleep more than it needed anything, and his racing, fearful mind that would not, could not, let the sleep come. And the more the nights of bad sleep piled up behind him, the worse it grew, for the body that is short of sleep grows more anxious and more wakeful, not less, so that sleeplessness feeds upon itself and deepens night by night, the exhausted traveller growing more wired and more frightened and more wakeful, the more desperately he needs to rest. A cruel spiral that could, if it ran on long enough, unmake a person entirely, hollow out his strength and his judgment and his hope until he was no longer fit to walk or to think or to go on. Against that spiral, against the very deepest reach of the sleepless dark, the valerian was the last and strongest mercy, the deep quiet route that could reach down past the racing and the fear and the wired exhaustion and draw the traveller down at last into the deep good mending sleep and break the cruel spiral and give him back in the morning enough of himself to walk another day. There was no more precious gift than that on the long road, for the sleep that the strange, smelling root gave back was, as the old wise people always said, the great mender of the body, the deep nightly repair of all the day had worn, and the traveller who could find it could survive almost anything, and the one who could not, in the end, could not. So let us stand very softly now, very quietly, beside a pilgrim at the true bottom of the night. It is the black middle of the dark, in a crowded hostel on the road far from home, and he has lain awake for hours, rigid and wide-eyed and despairing, his exhausted body crying out for the rest his racing mind will not allow, listening to the snoring of strangers and the small sounds in the dark and the loud, frightened slamming of his own heart, doing the terrible arithmetic of the hours until the dawn. But before he lay down, hours ago, in the last light of the dying fire, he steeped the strange, smelling root in his cup and drank it down, and now, slowly, slowly, in the deep dark, the deep quiet root is beginning at last to do its gentle work. His racing heart begins to slow. The tight, wound tangle of his nerves begins to loosen. The grip of his fears begins gently to ease. The worn track his thoughts have run all night begins to blur and soften and fade. And the sleep that fled him for so long steals back at last across the dark floor and reaches him and folds him in, and his wide and frightened eyes grow heavy and close, and he sinks down, below the snoring and the small sounds and the fear, down into the deep, good mending dark of true sleep, and is held there, safe, until the grey morning. That is the 11th plant, the quiet route for the sleepless inn. Let it rest now, deep and gentle, in the warm dark all around you, and let your own breath grow slower still with the saying of it, and let your own eyes, if they wish, grow heavy, for there is only one plant left now in the bag, and then the long quiet night is yours. Let us reach in, very gently, one last time. The last thing in the bag is wrapped more carefully than all the rest, folded in a clean cloth, and tied about with a thread, for it was the most prized and the most guarded of the 12, the plant the traveller carried against the very greatest of all the road's terrors, the terror that walked behind him every step of the way. It is a piece of dried root, thick and pale and ridged, and a few dried seeds, and when I unwrap it and bring it near the flame, there rises a strong, warm, sweet, spicy, almost holy scent, a scent like nothing else, deep and aromatic, and somehow comforting. The scent of a plant the old people held to be half medicine and half blessing. It is a tall and stately plant of the cool northern places, growing far taller than a man in the damp meadows and by the streams of the high cold countries, with great rounded heads of small greenish, white flowers held up on thick hollow stems. A plant so striking and so strong, scented, and so powerful in its virtues that the old people gave it a name that lifts it almost out of the garden and into heaven itself, for they named it the angel's herb, the angelica, and they believed it to be a gift sent down from the angels to defend frightened humankind against the worst that the world could do, against the pestilence and against the dread of it. For we come now, at the very last, to the greatest fear of all, the one I have touched on twice already and saved, deliberately, for the end, the fear of the pestilence, the plague, the great death that haunted those centuries as nothing has haunted any age before or since. The pilgrim walked through a world in which the plague was a living memory and an ever-present threat, a thing that had, within living memory, or the memory of fathers, swept across the whole of the known world and emptied town after town and killed so many that the living could not bury the dead, and that returned again and again in waves down the years with no warning and no mercy and no cure. And the pilgrim, who walked from town to town and slept in crowded hostels among strangers from 100 far places, was as exposed to it as any soul alive, walking, all unknowing, straight into towns where it had struck, sleeping beside travellers who might already carry it. And there was, in truth, nothing in his bag or in any physician's chest that could truly save him from it, if it took him. That is the hard and sorrowful truth, and I will not soften it, for the old medicine, for all its quiet wisdom, did not know the true nature of its greatest enemy, and could not defeat it. But the angelica, the angel's herb, was the plant the people set against it all the same, with all their hope and all their faith, and it was prized above almost everything for that. The old belief, which I told you of when we spoke of the garlic, was that the plague was carried on bad and corrupted air, on foul and poisonous vapors, and that strong, clean, sweet, smelling things could drive that bad air off and keep the corruption from entering the body, and of all the strong, sweet, smelling things the people knew, the angelica was reckoned among the very strongest and the very best, the great defender against the corrupted air. And so in the plague years the people chewed the root of the angelica, slowly, to fill the mouth and the breath with its strong, sweet, aromatic strength, and they carried pieces of the root about themselves, and they wore it on a cord around the neck, an amulet of the angel's herb worn against the breast, to breathe its protection in with every breath, and to keep, they believed, the bad air at bay. And the angel's herb was thought to do more, to strengthen the heart and the spirit against the sickness, to warm and fortify the body, so that it might better resist, to be a deep and powerful tonic to a soul standing in the shadow of the great death. And so the pilgrim who must walk through the plague, haunted world carried the angel's herb above all his other treasures, chewed it, wore it, trusted it, prayed over it. Now I have told you, and I will tell you again gently, that the bad air was not the true cause, and that the angelica could not truly have held the great pestilence off, and that many who chewed it and wore it died all the same. And there is a deep sorrow in that, in all those frightened faithful souls trusting their lives to the angel's herb and finding, too often, that the angel did not come. I would not have you think the old people foolish for it, though, for they did the very best they could with what they knew, and they reached, in their terror, for the strongest and sweetest and most hopeful thing they had, and who among us, facing so vast and so merciless a terror with so little knowledge, would have done any differently. And there is this, too, to be said, and it is not a small thing, for I told you when we spoke of the garlic that fear itself is a kind of sickness, and that the racing heart and the freezing dread of pure terror can lay a soul low almost as surely as the plague, and against that, against the fear, the angel's herb may truly have done real good. For the pilgrim walking through the shadow of death, with the strong sweet root in his mouth, and the amulet of it warm against his breast, breathing its deep aromatic comfort with every breath, believing, with all his heart, that the angels were defending him through it, may well have walked on steadier and calmer and braver than he could have done with empty hands. His terror eased, his heart slowed, his spirit fortified, and that steadiness, that small returned courage, was itself a kind of medicine, perhaps the only medicine that could truly be given against so great a fear. And the angel's herb gave it, and that was not nothing, that was a very great deal. And there is a thing about the angel's herb that gathers up much of what the whole bag was for, which is that so many of these plants worked, in the end, as much upon the mind as upon the body, and that the old people, without ever quite saying it the way we would, understood how deeply the two are bound together. They knew, in their own way, that a frightened body sickens faster than a calm one, that a soul without hope fails where a soul with hope endures, that the racing heart and the clenched gut of pure terror can lay a person low as surely as any fever, and so a great part of their medicine, and not the least part, was aimed at the steadying of the spirit, at the giving of courage and calm and hope. The garlic breathed against the fear of the plague. The chamomile soothed the frayed evening nerves. The valerian quieted the frightened, sleepless heart, and the angel's herb, last and greatest of these, gave courage itself, the simple ability to keep walking through the shadow. We sometimes think the old medicine was only a fumbling toward our own, a collection of half right guesses about the body, but it was more than that, for it tended the whole suffering person. The fear and the grief, and the loneliness and the despair, as well as the wound and the fever, and in that wholeness, in that tending of the spirit alongside the body, it held a wisdom we are only now, slowly, beginning to find our way back toward, the old true knowledge that you cannot heal a body while you leave the frightened soul inside it untended, and that hope and calm and courage and good sleep are medicines as real and as necessary as any root or leaf. And in the smaller, surer ways too the angelica did real good, for it was a fine warming aromatic plant for the cold and weakened body and the troubled belly, much as the ginger was, kindling warmth and easing the digestion and settling the gut, and the chewing of the strong sweet root warmed and steadied and comforted a worn traveller in 100 ordinary ways, quite apart from the great terror, so that the angel's herb earned its place in the bag many times over, even setting the plague aside. But it is for the plague that I remember it, and for the fear of the plague, and for the frightened faithful pilgrim walking through the shadow with the angel's herb against his breast. And that is how I will leave it, the last and most tender of the 12, the plant of hope itself. The plant a frightened soul carried not, because it would surely save him, but because, with it, he could walk on it all. And I would have you sit a moment longer with the angel's herb, and with the great fear it was carried against, for it gathers up, this last plant, something of the whole spirit of the road and of the people who walked it. You must understand that the pilgrim walked in a world where death was very close, far closer than it is to us, where children died and mothers died, and the strong died young, where the plague had emptied whole regions within living memory, and might return at any time without warning, and where there was, against the worst of it, almost no defense at all. And to walk out into such a world on purpose, away from home and safety, toward a far holy place, was an act of enormous faith and enormous courage, and also, very often, an act born of that very nearness of death. For many a pilgrim walked, because death had taken someone he loved, or because he feared his own was near and wished to make his peace, or because the only thing to be done with so much fear and so much grief was to take it out onto the road and walk. And so the angel's herb, the plant of hope, was in a way the most fitting of all the 12 to carry, for it was the plant that answered not a particular hurt of the body, but the great underlying fear of the whole journey, the nearness of death itself, and it answered that fear not with a cure. For there was no cure, but with hope, and with courage, and with the strong, sweet, aromatic comfort of believing that the angels themselves were walking beside the frightened traveler and defending him. We know now, as I have said and will not hide, that the bad air was not the true enemy, and that the herb could not turn the true sickness, and that many who trusted it died, and there is a deep sorrow in that. But there is also something I have always found beautiful in it, the picture of all those frightened, faithful souls across all those centuries, walking through the shadow of the great death with a piece of pale, sweet root in the mouth, and an amulet of it warm against the breast, breathing its comfort, believing in their defense, and finding, in that belief, the courage to walk on it all. The herb gave them that courage, and courage, in the face of so vast a terror, was perhaps the only true medicine there was, and the angel's herb gave it freely. And that was no small gift, but in its quiet way the greatest gift of all the 12, the gift of being able to keep walking through the shadow toward the holy place, with the fear eased just enough to bear. So let us stand, one last time, very gently, beside a pilgrim with the angel's herb. It is a grey morning, and the road ahead leads down into a valley, and in the valley is a town. And word has come up the road that the pestilence is in that town, that the doors are marked and the bell is tolling, and the pilgrim must pass through it, for there is no other road, and his heart is cold with the oldest and deepest fear a human soul can feel, the fear of the great death. And he stops on the high road above the valley, and he takes from his bag the carefully wrapped last treasure, the piece of pale ridged root, and he unwraps it, and the strong, sweet, holy scent of it rises up around him in the grey morning air, and he breaks off a piece and puts it in his mouth and begins, slowly, to chew, filling his breath with its aromatic strength, and he settles the amulet of it warm against his breast, beneath his shirt, over his frightened heart, and he says a quiet prayer to the angels he believes are listening, and he feels, whether by the herb or the prayer, or the deep old hope of his people, his cold fear ease just enough, his slamming heart slow just enough, his frozen courage thaw just enough, that he can put one foot in front of the other and start down the road into the valley, toward the marked doors and the tolling bell, breathing the sweet, strong breath of the angel's herb, walking on, into the shadow and through it, and out the far side, and on toward the holy place, alive and breathing and going on. That is the 12th plant. The plant worn against the pestilence and the dread, and with it the bag is empty, and our long road is very nearly done. The bag lies open and empty, now in the small warm circle of the candle, the worn brown leather soft and slack, the little bone toggle resting where I have laid it, and the 12 plants lie spread before us on the counter, each one back in its place in my memory, each one having done its quiet work and told its quiet story. And before I fold the flap over and tie the toggle and set the bag down for the night, let me gather them up once more, very slowly, very softly, not for you to remember. For I have told you many times now that there will be no quiz and nothing to keep, but only for the simple gentle pleasure of saying the old names over again in the lamplight, like a hand running once more along a shelf of familiar jars before the candle goes out. We began with the leaf that walked beside every traveler, the humble waybread that grew in the very dust of the road, chewed to a soft green pulp and bound onto the blistered, bleeding, road-worn foot, the cure springing up in the very wound the road had made. And we took up the bone, knitter of the cold high pass, the dark gnarled root that was grated to a grey paste and bound around the wrenched ankle high on the killing mountain, hardening into a casing that held the hurt limbs still while it mended. And we found the soldier's herb on the lonely road, the soft grey feathery leaf crushed and packed into the bleeding wound to staunch the flowing blood and hold the festering at bay, the warrior's woundwort that stood between the traveller and the slow death by the roadside. And we steeped the bitter cup against the flux, the silver ghost leaf that fanned the small clean fire of the cold and frightened belly, and turned aside the great killer of the road, and we held the small white bulb that kept the fear away, the pungent clove eaten against the foul water and breathed against the very breath of the pestilence, the smell of every safe kitchen, carried into the most dangerous places of the world. And we went down to the sea and chewed the warm root from the far east against the heaving of the long voyage to the holy city, the costly fiery root that settled the sea, sick belly, and kindled the inner fire against all the coldnesses of the road. And we steeped the bark that cooled the fever of the marshes, the bitter grey bark of the weeping tree that brought down the burning heat and eased the deep-beaten ache, holding within it the very mercy we keep still in our own cabinets against pain and fever. And we gathered the sweet meadow herb for the soaring stomach, the honey-scented froth of the wet summer meadow, the queen of the meadow that did the willow's good work sweetly and gently upon the tender body and the burning belly. And we chewed the grey, green leaf of long life, the honoured sage that tended the sore mouth and the raw throat and gave back something of the strength the long road took, the herb of which the old rhyme asked how any soul could die who had it growing by the door. And then we came to the three that were for the part of the traveller the road wore hardest of all, which was not the body but the heart and the mind. We steeped the little sun, flower for the tired evening, the gold and white chamomile that soothed the aching belly, and the gritty eyes, and the frayed and frightened spirit in the soft difficult hour at the end of the day, the kindest and most lovable of all the plants in the bag. And we steeped the quiet root for the sleepless inn, the strange, smelling valerian that reached down into the very bottom of the black wakeful night, and quieted the racing heart, and loosened the grip of fear, and gave back, at last, the deep good mending sleep that is the great repair of all the day has worn. And last of all we unwrapped the plant, worn against the pestilence and the dread, the angel's herb, the angelica. The plant of hope itself, chewed and worn against the greatest terror a soul can feel. The plant a frightened pilgrim carried not, because it would surely save him, but because, with it, he could find the courage to walk on at all. And I find myself thinking, here at the end, of the homeward road, the long way back that we have hardly spoken of, for we have followed the pilgrim out to the holy place. But the bag and its 12 plants had to carry him home again too, all the long weary distance, and the homeward road was, in its own way, the harder of the two. For going out, the traveller was carried by the bright dream of the shrine, the goal pulling him on through every grey day. But coming home, that pull was spent, the great thing done, the vow fulfilled. And now there was only the long, long road back, the same mountains to recross, the same fevers to risk, the same sleepless inns to suffer, but with the spirit no longer lifted by the dream ahead, only the quieter, deeper longing for home. And the body, coming home, was the most worn it would ever be, used up by the whole journey, thin and grey and aching, with the least strength left to bear the most familiar dangers. And so the 12 plants did perhaps their truest work on the homeward road, tending the spent and homesick traveller across the last long miles. The way-bread on the worn feet, the sage giving back a little strength, the chamomile easing the tired evenings, the valerian guarding the precious sleep, all the way back, at last, to the one road the pilgrim knew best of all, the road that ran the last few miles into his own village, where the church tower he had not seen in a year rose up at last over the familiar hills, and someone who loved him looked up from the field and saw him coming, gaunt and grey and changed but alive, home, the road behind him, the bag empty, the journey done. And I think the bag itself, hung up by the door of that home, kept for the rest of the pilgrim's life as a treasure and a memory, must have held, in its worn and empty leather, the whole of the road folded up inside it, every mile and every fear and every small green mercy, and that on the long winter evenings ever after, by his own fire. The old pilgrim might have taken it down and turned it in his hands, and remembered the plants that had walked beside him, the leaf in the dust and the root on the mountain, and the warm spice on the heaving sea, and been quietly grateful, as I am quietly grateful tonight, for the old patient kindness of the plants toward the suffering travellers of the world. 12 plants, a leaf for the feet, a root for the broken joint, a feather for the wound, a bitter cup and a white bulb for the foul-fed belly, a warm root for the sea, a bitter bark and a sweet flower for the fever, a grey leaf for the worn body, and 3 gentle things for the worn and frightened and sleepless spirit. That is what the little bag held, against the whole vast weight of the road. It was not magic. It could not save everyone, and it did not. Many a pilgrim died for all his herbs. Of fevers the willow could not cool, and fluxes the wormwood could not stop, and the great pestilence, the angel's herb, could not turn aside, and lies still in some forgotten wayside grave far from the home he set out from. I would not tell you a prettier story than the true one, but the plants did real good, too, more good than you might think, easing the feet that had to walk and the belly that had to bear the bad water and the wound that had to stop its bleeding and the fever that had to break and the frightened sleepless heart that had to find its rest, and a great many pilgrims who would otherwise have fallen by the road were carried on by them, all the way to the holy place and all the long way home again, and lived to sit by their own fires in their own old age and tell their grandchildren of the road, and of the little bag, and of the 12 plants that walked it with them. And I will tell you a thing I find quietly wonderful, lying awake in the dark thinking of it, which is how very long the memory of these plants is, how far back it reaches, and how far forward it has come. The pilgrim who packed his little bag did not invent any of this knowledge. He inherited it. The waybread on the blistered foot, the bitter wormwood for the foul belly, the willow bark against the fever, the valerian root for the sleepless night. These were not his discoveries, but the gathered wisdom of all the people who had walked before him, handed down from grandmother to grandchild, and from monk to monk, and from the old worn herb, books copied out by candlelight in the monasteries, all the way back, and back, and back, to the physicians of Greece and Rome, who had written the first of it down 1,000 years, and more before he was born, and beyond them to the dim, unwritten beginnings of all healing, to the very first person who ever stooped, by some forgotten road, to chew a leaf and press it to a wound. The little bag held, folded inside it, the whole long memory of human kindness toward the suffering body, the slow patient accumulation of 10,000 years of people watching and trying and remembering and passing on what worked. And the pilgrim carried all of that with him in 12 humble plants along the roads of the Middle Ages. And the memory did not stop with him, but came on down the centuries, all the way to us, to this very room, to this very night. For I am an apothecary, and the craft I keep is the same craft, only grown and changed across the long years, and the plants on my own shelves are the children and the grandchildren of the plants in that old bag. We learned, in time, why the willow bark cooled the fever, and the meadow's wheat eased the ache, and we drew the very thing out of them, and made of it the small tablet you may keep in your own cabinet to this day, so that when you reach for it against a headache or a fever, you are reaching across all the centuries for the gift of the weeping tree and the queen of the meadow, the very same gift the pilgrim steeped by the fire in his bitter cup. We learned why the garlic guarded the belly, and the chamomile soothed the spirit, and the valerian gave back the sleep, and we use them still on our own shelves, in our own kitchens, in our own quiet evenings. The old knowledge was not lost. It was carried, hand to hand, all the way down the long road of the years, the way the pilgrim carried his bag, and tonight it has rested for a little while here, with us, in the small warm circle of this one candle, and that is a thing worth being quietly glad of before we let it go and sleep, and you need not have kept any of it. I told you so at the very beginning, when first we undid the toggle and lifted the flap. And I meant it then, and I mean it now at the end. The names may all drift away from you into the dark. The plants may blur and soften and dissolve, the waybread and the knitbone, and the angel's herb running together into one green murmur in the warm dark. And that is exactly as it should be, for I was never truly speaking to teach you anything, only to keep you gentle company through the long night, the way a kind soul at a wayside hospice might have kept company with a weary traveler, asking nothing, offering only the warmth of the fire and the soft sound of an old voice in the dark. If even one soft image lingers as you slip away, the broad leaf chewed and bound on a tired heel, the grey paste hardening around an ankle high on a cold mountain, the warm root chewed at the rail of a ship far out on the grey rolling sea, the little gold flowers steeping sweet at the end of a hard day, the quiet root drawing a frightened soul down at last into sleep. Then that is more than enough, and you may let even that go now, gently, into your own good rest. For it is time now to sleep. The candle is very low and burning blue at the last of the wick, and in a moment I will fold the worn flap of the empty bag over, and tie the little bone toggle, and set the bag down on the shelf in the dark, where it will rest until the morning, its long roads all behind it now, all its walking done. And you, wherever you are, in your own quiet room, in your own warm and gathering dark, will let yourself sink down at last into your own good and healthful sleep, the sleep the old wise people called the great mender of the body, the deep nightly repair of all that the day has worn away. There is no road for you to walk tonight. There is no cold pass to cross, and no dark sea to suffer, and no strange inn to lie sleepless in. You are not a pilgrim tonight. You are home, and you are warm, and you are safe, and there is nothing left in all the world that asks anything of you at all. So let the shoulders soften, and let the jaw unclench, and let the hands lie open and easy. Let the long, slow breath grow slower still, and slower and softer, until you can hardly feel it come and go. Let the whole weight of you settle down into the bed beneath you, heavy and warm and held. If there is any small ache left in you from your own day's road, let the kind old herbs of the bag tend it as you drift, the cool leaf on the tired place, the sweet tea easing the worn body, the quiet root drawing you gently down. There is nothing more to think tonight, and nothing more to do, and nowhere at all that you need to go. Thank you for sitting with me here in the quiet, through this long and gentle night, and for walking the old roads with the pilgrims a while, and for letting an old apothecary open up his little bag and name the plants one last time in the lamplight before the dark. The bag is closed now. The lamp is nearly out. The road is behind us, and the holy place is reached, and the long way home is walked, and all that is left is rest. So rest now. Let the candle go out. Let the warm dark gather close around you and hold you safe, and sleep well and deeply and sweetly all the long night through, until the slow grey light comes soft to the window again, and the world, gently, in its own good time, begins once more. Good night. Sleep now. The bag is closed, and the lamp is out, and all is quiet, and you are safe in the warm dark. Sleep.